right, what's going on? All right, clearly we're starting out a little bit lean, but everybody knows how this works. I'm not here to draw a large crowd. If I do, that's more people I talk to. Otherwise, you can catch me in the replay. All right, so I appreciate anyone who's here right now, but I'm sure we'll get more folks later, but that doesn't stop the message. All right, go ahead and sit back, folks. We're going to groove a little bit more to roots maneuver. Witness fitness while I get some things together. Let's go ahead and get this started because there's a lot of stuff I want to get into tonight, and I still got stuff I need to do offside. So, first off, foremost, welcome to a Value Conversation Gen X Spoken Word. Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what we've got going on over here. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do, and subscribe if this is what you're looking for. So, I don't know how loud the music is in the background, but let me know if it's drowning anything out that I'm saying. All right, so everybody, we see the topic for today's show, or dare I even say lecture. FBA steals prominence they can't achieve. So I don't know if anyone here right now, all three of you and whoever's lurking out in the clouds, had an opportunity to see a teaser message that I let go on YouTube and both TikTok talking about FBA's habit of procuring what they cannot achieve. But I got a whole lot of responses back, which I expected to. Now, the crazy thing here is that out of everyone who was talking all that noise inside of my comment and chat, notice they're nowhere to be found here on the platform. I don't hide. I let everybody know. Even this kid who's got this fake account calling himself Tariq Nasheed, or even if it is the actual Tariq Nasheed, he drops his comments, he leaves. I don't mind if you want to stay. We can have this conversation. I don't see where everyone has got it all twisted about this fact that we are not, as Black people, African Americans, African descendant, Afro-American, Afro-American, all these names that we were once known as, but died out into the side because folks rather would call us colored, Negro, and of course, pardon my language, nigger. Those were the names that we were known as. And as a result, the expression African American seems made up to a lot of people. The term was actually first used in 1782 to describe a Black man who had written a pamphlet that discussed the capture of Lord Cornwallis. Now notice the man's name again, Lord Cornwallis. You know that was a long time ago, in 1782, over 200 something years ago. And I believe the expression was used, pamphlet written by an African-American gentleman, something along those lines. But be that as it may, Jesse Jackson did not coin the term African-American. But we're going to troll my chat in TikTok at the very end if we have enough time. I want you to see this foundational Black ignorance that doesn't even talk amongst each other. You can swat the nonsense out over here, but as soon as you dispel it, here comes 8 to 10 other folks saying the same thing. No, Jesse Jackson made up African American. I was there. Oh, the level of Black ignorance that has taken over our community right now, I have to say it's unmatched. It doesn't make any sense how this happened. But then when you stop and think about it, you can trace it down. You can watch what happened. You can see that towards the end of the civil rights movement, once civil rights was achieved, those blacks who had grown up through the 20s, 30s, 40s, even some who may have been born in the late 1900s, had a taste of something that was truly being denied of them. Freedom, first and foremost, not that we didn't have it, but true freedom, meaning that we were now free to buy, rent property. Although it was stated as such with the 14th Amendment, shortly after the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were known as the Reconstruction Amendments. But even then, looking back at that, after the Voting Rights Act was passed, after the Civil Rights Act was passed, Fair Housing Act, all of that gave a sense of ownership and inclusion that blacks, and I use that loosely right now, but when I say blacks, I want people to think about this. Think of this not as African American, although that's what we are, but think of this as us being African descendants, because that's what we are. Everybody wants to play this game. Well, I'm not African, I'm Black American. Well, think about this, partner. Your view of yourself being Black American would not have been possible had it not been for Africans being brought to this country. I shouldn't say brought, but being kidnapped and forced to this country. See, listening to someone say that I've got no African heritage, all my peoples come from America, that's about as ignorant as saying I was born, but yet I was not born of my mother. Does that make any sense to anyone? It's just absolute ignorance to listen to someone make the statement that they have no ancestral affiliation with Africa. No one's saying that you're African. I am not Native African, but I am African descendant, as is every other Black person on the planet who was not born on African soil. I don't know why that's so hard for people to accept. Where did the term FBA get its start? Well, it got its start first from Tariq Nasheed, but you have to go back a little bit further. First, you had the American descendants of slaves, and FBA is just an offshoot of that, although, dare I say, more maniacal. The thing that everyone needs to understand here is that FBA and ADOS don't really look at uplifting Black culture per se. Their whole mission is to put themselves in front of the narrative of reparations. That's it. That is the only thing that you see. And when you listen to FBA talk about reparations, they talk about it in a fashion as if no one else had slavery. No one else experienced slavery. And this is how they speak, while not realizing and taking it into consideration, North America was one of, if not the last continent to have slaves brought to it. Oh, yes. See, a lot of folks who call themselves FBA, like some damn pep rally, FBA forever, all this other nonsense. A lot of them fail to recognize that when they like to say, oh, we were here before the English. Well, yes, we were here before the English because we were brought here by the Spanish to be slaves in failed Spanish colonies that did not make it, with the exception of, I guess there was one in Florida, or what we know as to be Florida, back in the early 1500s or so, that thrived for the most part. But when we talk about the slaves that came here before the European, they were slaves. They were brought here as slaves. There was about 100 of them brought to a site that failed in between Georgia and Alabama around the year 1526. famine, disease, and of course, the revolting of the Spanish-speaking Africans that they brought. Of course, because of the fact that the Spanish didn't want to stay with these upstart Negroes, they went ahead, got on their boats, and they went back to La Hispaniola, or Haiti. The blacks who were abandoned here on North American soil on 1526, they themselves integrated into the local African populace, to which you have your black Seminoles and so forth. We as a people are not indigenous to North America. Science has already proven that. I've stated that before, but I'll do more on that if need be. How do you distinguish between African Americans with a legacy of slavery and African Americans who are voluntary immigrants? So again, this is conflation. I don't know if you're doing this on purpose or if you're asking a legit question, but look at this from the standpoint. You can't have African Americans on North American soil who are not descendant from African American slaves or descendants of African American slaves, because these same slaves were descendants of enslaved Africans. If you have any African Americans who are over here as voluntary immigrants, these would be naturalized people. Let's say if someone came from Canada or even from England. That's a perfect example. If a brother came from England and he was here for 7 years, he is now a naturalized citizen, and he identifies or could identify as African American, or he may be Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Jamaican, something along those lines. But the thing of an African American who is a voluntary immigrant, okay, that's a conflation, and that's just something mixed up, or that's a term that's faceted or just thrown together to try and create a narrative. All right, so good point now. Isn't that important with regards to any potential reparations? Well, here's the thing when you talk about reparations. If we look at slavery as a whole, anyone who is, for example, okay, I'm taking it that your question is sincere, so I'm going to give you the best answer that I can give you. Now, you can go to someone who is FBA minded. Oh, no, they all tethers, man. Don't listen to them. No, I'm going to give you the perspective that you can go back and look at. Not to mention, I've got some definitions here that may be of some use to you. So again, going back to your question, isn't that important with regards to potential reparations? The fact of the matter is that if we looked at reparations as a whole, anyone who is African descendant, notice I didn't say African American, because African Americans are African descendants. Haitian Americans, Jamaican Americans, anyone on the island of Jamaica, of Antigua, back in Haiti, they are African descendant. All of those people are entitled to reparations. What FBA has tried to do, first and foremost, is create this gamesmanship. All right, this toiletry of word usage. All right, they're flirting with words. Foundation. Anything that anyone of African American, aka African descendant heritage, did back in 1800 or so, 1815, 1830, whatever, that would have been considered foundational because they would have been the first. And that's the whole aspect of FBA playing this game of calling themselves foundation. That way, if there's any act that was done or accomplished by an actual African American, because there was no one who called themselves FBA back then. As I said before, we were colored, Negro, and primarily nigger. But also, we were Afro-Americans, we were Afro-Americans as well. This has been annotated, but those terms were never used because it was always more disparaging to call Black folks nigger. So again, your sincere question here, potential reparations. Oh yeah, everyone is entitled to reparations, but in FBA's mind, in order to put themselves in control of the narrative, which is a failed narrative, they crafted the concept of Foundation of Black Americans and then came up with the idea that, well, if you were not a slave in America and you can't trace your lineage back to slavery, then you are entitled to reparations. That's a lie. That is a damn lie, because of the fact that, remember, FBA's whole aspect and the whole shtick is anti-Black. Anti-Black immigrant, where you from? Haiti, from Jamaica, even from Africa. To the point where they claim that, oh, well, we have nothing to do with Africa. We are indigenous to the land, which we are not. So therefore, Foundation of Black Americans shouldn't even be talking about reparations, because they denounce their African heritage. And verbatim, reparations is intended for the descendants of those of enslavement, of African enslavement. As with Native American tribes, they ascribe a certain percentage of Indian heritage to become a tribal member. Yes, and you have pretendians who claim to be indigenous, but yet none of them will step forward and actually go through the process of claiming tribalship. I'm probably going to have a show in this in the coming weeks or so, and I may invite Cassandra Coles, who is a full-blooded Native American, to give more information regarding that. So I'm going to answer this last question for you, man, because I really need to go ahead and get started. How would that look with reparations for African Americans? Again, if African Americans were to look at reparations, it would be based upon our African heritage. And it's as simple as that. So this whole thing of, well, I can trace my lineage back to slavery. Well, the thing is that FBA believes that them tracing their lineage means that, well, my family had slaves. You know what? So did my family. But the thing here is that they're trying to exclude anyone who is not Black and born in America. Okay, so you play that game. The fact is that these folks are still entitled, because we are all African descendant. And whether you were a slave in North America, a slave in Haiti, a slave in Jamaica, or a slave in the South, in South America, that is still reparations for that individual. The question here is that who is going to be responsible for doling it out? So I say right now, don't get caught up with this thing. Oh, well, I'm not African American, I'm Black American. You know what? You are African descendant. All right, talk your way out of that, FBA. No, you can't. It is anthropologically impossible. But of course, they'll come up with some nonsense to try and do it anyway. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get on with it. So I had a lot of folks inside of my TikTok chat and a few other places wanted to try and go at me and say, African descendant, that's not a thing. That's not a real word. Yeah, it is. Let's take this. All right, bear with me for a second, folks. Let me turn a couple of things off. All right, let's see if that helps. All right, so now with that out of the way, oops, bring this back up. Share screen. Let's go to task screen. That's what I'm looking for. All right, as I said before, FBA steals prominence they can't achieve. So I get this thing of, so why do you keep using African descendant? Or why do you keep using African Americans? I'm not African. Yes, you are. You may not be Native African, but you're African descendant. So I typed this in. African descendant is an official designation. African descendant, or people of African descent, is an official international human rights and legal designation used by bodies like the United Nations and various national governments though it is not a standard standalone census racial category in the United States. But essentially, it is an actual thing. So when you hear people say from now on, oh, African descendant, that's not a real thing. Yes, it is. It is an official designation. Now, rather than me read through all of this, I'll just skim through real fast. And if anyone here chooses to go back and watch the video and the replay, here it is. Or otherwise, just type it in the browser yourself. So if I did that, of course, I have to keep moving. African American is an official designation. Yes, African American is an official statistical and governmental designation used by the U.S. Census Bureau and federal agencies, though it is distinct from being a legal requirement or mandatory personal label. Now, as I said before, African American already existed in history. It just was never used because there were other colorful language that was used to describe us. And as I mentioned before, colored, Negro, and nigger. The three primary things until Afro-American was once again used. Again, Afro-American was, I want to say back in the mid-1800s where that term first came about. But it was not used because of the latter of the three, as I just mentioned. Afro-American was in popular use throughout the 60s, the 70s, and on, of course, the 80s, or on through the 80s until right around the last part of the 80s, where Jesse Jackson advocated for the revival of the use of African American to better align us with our African heritage. Again, we are not Native African, but we are African descendant. And as a result, that means that, yes, our ancestral home is Africa. That's like looking at a kid who is Italian American. He's never been to Italy. However, his heritage, his people around him, his culture that he experiences every day makes him Italian. He may not be native Italian born, but he is still Italian descendant. Only with Black people, we have this problem. I don't know what it is, but only us, we have this issue of our identity or trying to create one when we already have one. Again, slow scroll. So if I did African descendant and African American, you know what I had to do, right? Oh yeah. Foundational Black American is not an official designation. My response that I got, you are correct that Foundational Black American is not an official government or legal classification. It is a social and cultural term used in political discourse to describe Black Americans who descend from persons enslaved in the United States. Now, notice when it talks about persons enslaved in the United States, it's real vague there. Not that it was being intentional, but that's just a fact, descended from enslaved people in the United States. But the thing here is that when you have this discussion with anyone from FBA about the slave, enslaved heritage, it's always the thing of, yeah, I can trace my lineage back to a slave. But they want to section everything off. They don't want to talk about where the lineage of that slave goes to. They think the game is over just because they can say, oh, Mary Martha May is part of my family tree. I'm one of her descendants. So therefore, I'm FBA. No, you are not FBA. You are not Foundational Black American. There's no such thing as FBA, or was back in the time of slavery. It's a modern term that came up. Now, there was Negro, there was African American, there was Africo-American, there was colored, and there was Afro-American. All that is documented. So whether FBA likes it or not, we've been African American for a long time. Just because it wasn't used a lot doesn't mean that the term and expression did not exist. But as I was saying, this slave that FBA will associate themselves with had lineage to speak of him or herself. That slave back on the plantation was a descendant of enslaved Africans. But FBA doesn't want to talk about that because, again, they've crafted this narrative, misusing the word foundational to create a narrative and a position for themselves to be construed as the head of a movement looking for reparations, something that they themselves are not entitled to, if you think about it, because they have denounced their African heritage and now consider themselves to be Indian or some shit like that. Anyway, going on. Let's look at characteristics of the term. Status. It is a self-identified lineage descriptor rather than a federally or state-recognized ethnic category. The term is used in online and political spaces to separate the lineage of U.S. chattel slavery from more recent Black and White groups. Now, luck, you're still here. This is a perfect example of what I was talking about, how FBA crafted a narrative to put themselves in a position to be seen as the authority of something they have no claim to. So when you hear somebody say, oh, my peoples were slaves, this and your peoples were slaves, that's an idiot talking. Because there's no different from his people being slaves and my people being slaves. Because if we are both Black American, AKA African American, we are African descendant. Again, FBA, talk your way out of that. So let's keep it moving, this last section. So here's something else I went a little bit further that I want people to get an understanding of when I'm talking about how you see this gamesmanship with FBA and how they flirt with words. Claiming foundational Black American socio-political affiliation to be a genealogy misrepresents how human ancestry and genetics operates. So if you're wondering why I put that term in here, let's go back one bit here. Let me slide down. Here we go. You look at where it says scope. Proponents describe it, and we're talking about foundational Black American nonsense. Proponents describe it as a cultural framework and a genealogical identifier rather than a formal organization. So again, AI is doing its best to try and put together a paragraph that seems comprehensive and intuitive, but yet it's only adding to the confusion. Why do I say this? So let's look at the concept when we talk about genealogical. Genealogical factors here. Conflating a modern socio-political grouping like foundational Black American with biological genealogy or genetics can oversimplify how human ancestry works, as genetics track continuous ancestral segments globally, while political identities designate specific historical and legal experiences within a nation. So if you go a little bit further into this, genetic continuity. DNA tests show that human ancestry is fluid, revealing diverse sub-Saharan African, European, and sometimes indigenous genetic markers in African Americans due to historical admixture. Lineage boundaries. Genetics do not recognize strict national or political borders, meaning no genetic wall separates the descendants of U.S. chattel slavery from other members of the global African diaspora. As I said, FBA ideology, is nonsensical, absolute trash. Now, I'm a little disappointed that all my naysayers who wanted to flip and run their game and run their lip on TikTok didn't show up on the show. Hell, I would have let someone come up and have a conversation. My whole point of doing these shows, folks, is not to try and convince FBA they're wrong, but to more or less allow other people to see how outlandish FBA is as they backstroke and try and come up with the most ludicrous ideas of trying to justify why they are not African, but instead are indigenous to America. So going one last bit here. Social constructs. Racial and political affiliations are defined by shared history, social treatment, and cultural evolution on specific soil, rather than isolated genetic purity. All right, so let this nonsense go. FBA has no history. FBA has no culture. They have no legacy. They have no lineage. But I want to go into some of that again, because I generally have to, because they don't seem to understand the words that they use and attempt to find. All right, moving on. So this is a periodical or an article that I come to from time to time. Um, Black Agenda Report. Now, this is just one of many magazines, or let me back that up. Many news areas that I come to if I'm looking for information outside of CNN, uh, NBC, MSNBC, Reuters. Who else? Just basic folks I read news from, just to see what it is if I look at it from strictly a Black perspective as opposed to an overall perspective. So I will say that the information that comes off of this page, I have some indifference with them from time to time. But you do have these Blacks, and I'm not saying this negatively, but like being Black myself or again African descendant, but still Black, we'll just use that for right now. We do have Blacks who have an opinion that is negative of both Republican and Democrat, and even independent. They'll participate in the voting of neither party, but they still have something that they want to say from what they see. I'm not saying that's the case with the person who wrote this, but I'm saying that you generally have folks who have an issue with whoever's in the White House, white or Black. So you take it with a grain of salt, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a broken clock is not right 2 times a day. Let's go ahead and get on with it. It is time to reckon with the reactionary rantings of Adolph's FBA. So it looks like this is a Twitter screenshot. I'm not sure what was going on here, but we'll just go with it. My parents, nor my grandparents, ever mentioned Marcus Garvey when I was growing up, and I've never heard him spoken about in the South by any of my teachers or pastors. That sounds like a Black person who's grown up in what I call a conservative Southern stronghold. So if you grew up in one of those areas, that would probably be why you never heard of him. But take a look at it. East Texas. That may be why, if he's from Texas, depending on the area that this individual is in, of course you never heard of Marcus Garvey. The truth is Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican scammer, was a non-factor in the ADOS community, and he was not discussed at all where most ADOS people live, and that's the South. Now, he may have been discussed in New York City, but that means nothing to us. All right, so you hear the incompetence coming out of this guy's mouth. Marcus Garvey is spoken of even in England, where I lived, because of the fact that he came from the islands. Now, you may not have heard his name spoken of by, I'm from Generation X. I was born in 1970. So you may not have had a lot of Gen Xers who spoke his name. There were some who spoke his name, but that's only if they were born in Trinidad, if they were born in Haiti or born in Jamaica, born in Antigua, born in those areas where people were close by. The Africans who were brought there from different tribes, there was not a lot of room for everybody to move around in. So eventually they all learned everyone's language. And after they kicked out the occupiers, they more or less settled into their land. So you had a lot of conversations that were had essentially and eventually after all the different tribes mixed together and learned to speak one common language. So again, getting back to what I'm saying is that if this guy didn't hear about Marcus Garvey, it doesn't mean that no one else did. He just happened to be in an area where the name was not mentioned because of most likely where he was. And again, if he's in East Texas or anywhere in Texas where they do not care for us darkies, you may not have received the education. But when I listen to this is that type of ignorance I talk about that seems to flourish amongst FBA. I mean, honestly, claiming that Malcolm X is FBA, Martin Luther King is FBA, Dr. John Henry Clark is FBA. Anyone with a modicum of common sense knows that these are lies, and provable lies at that. But if you are in an area where you are cut off from any type of information that could educate you or better you, you're not going to know this. And that's what we're hearing from this individual. So enough of my ranting. So let's go ahead and get into this. The ADOS and FBA, American Descendants of Slavery and Foundation of Black Americans movements have gained influence by advocating for reparations exclusively for Black Americans descended from U.S. slavery while promoting a divisive anti-immigrant and reactionary ideology. ADOS and FBA's ideology is a dangerous diversion from true liberation. To achieve justice, Black radicals must reject this reactionary faction and reaffirm anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, Pan-African solidarity. And there you go. Now, when you speak to Pan-Africanists, we come in different shades. What I've learned, the ultimate goal as a Pan-Africanist should be the solidarity of Blacks from every diaspora. I go further, also looking at our history being properly told. But there are folks who have a more radicalized approach. Not saying that I'm any more, any less. But understand, you can put 2 or 3 Pan-Africans in the room, and just like FBA and some other folks, you're going to see a different ideology. And that's what I'm learning. The more that I hang out, the more that I see of my supposed Pan-Ams, a lot of these folks have some ideas like, God damn, son. But that's a different conversation. But anyway, the sole aspect of this article, because it is a long one, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because we got too many tabs to get through here, is more or less looking at the damage that FBA and ADOS have done to the Black community, claiming that they're here for reparations and that through their actions it can be achieved. But the problem is that neither of them have any accomplishments to speak of. Neither of them have any type of party that is a part of politics that has a stake in the game. All they are is just noise online. Pretty much like any one of us who have a microphone and access to the internet. Just someone who's talking loud on the internet. Now, what can make a difference in this is whether you attempt to inspire folks or enrage them, which is what I see FBA doing more of, with their false pretense of, well, look at all the things that we've done. FBA has built this country. No, you have not. I have continually asked throughout the day inside of my TikTok, FBA, give me one FBA icon. And the only thing they can come back with, oh, Tether, what makes you American? Same thing that makes you American. You were born on American soil. Hey, 14th Amendment. But still, the question does not get answered. Show me a foundational Black American who has received any type of award or recognition or contribution to African American culture. And then I'm all types of tethers and some other shit, but never will they give you anything other than platitudes. Oh, look at what we've done. We've done all this. You guys are just tethers who want to leech off of us and share our progress. Okay, what is your progress, Tether? And then that's it, silence. But again, this is ideally what the article looks at, as well as critical commentary being made about the Democratic Party, the Republican Party. You hear this thing of 2 sides of the same coin, all this type of nonsense. No, it is not. Because last I looked around, there's only one party that called Black history divisive. There's only one party that said Black history was racist. There's only one party that said Black history was revisionist. There's only one party that's working to undermine and pretty much abolish civil rights. It's not the Democratic Party. That's a fact. Still, the article is a good warning shot, focusing on how FBA routinely misuses icons and the whole premise of their existence, which is simply to get reparations. But in doing so, there's also a fair amount of fact and, let me take it back, fact. There's fact distortion they engage in. So again, it's a good read, but it's right here at the top if you want to go ahead and follow this through, all right? Let's go ahead and press on. So this is something I added in here as well that I want people to be real clear about when you hear me talk about FBA and a lot of their malevolent acts. Attempting to distinguish so-called foundational Black Americans from Native Africans and other people of African descent whose ancestors were never enslaved in the United States is a factual correlation to far-white, anti-Black immigrant rhetoric. When I say correlation, there's almost nothing different from what you're hearing from FBA when you listen to the divisive rhetoric that white supremacists and far-right extremists speak about. Oh, they're coming over here and dropping the wages. They're taking our jobs. They're poisoning society. FBA says the exact same damn thing. So when I hear folks say Blacks can't be racist, forget my language, bullshit. All you have to do is watch how FBA talks about anyone who does not support their divisive anti-Black diaspora rhetoric. Critics and civil rights scholars note that the ideology surrounding foundational Black Americans frequently adopts a distinct form of othering toward Black immigrants by drawing hard lines between domestic descendants of U.S. chattel slavery and recent African or Caribbean arrivals. Segments of the movement mirror nationalist rhetoric that blames immigrants for domestic, economic, and social grievances. And that's literally what you hear. It's like I told some folks on the last show, how are you going to sit here and claim that Mtumbe from Nigeria is stealing your job when you don't even qualify for the job of working in, we'll say, an engineering program? How can you say that this man is taking your job when he has a master's degree in engineering? Therefore, he's working in the field of engineering and you're working at Burger King. But yet you're claiming this man is over here trying to steal your job. That's that type of nonsense you get from FBA. Majority of the people talking about immigrants from other countries don't even qualify for the jobs that these immigrants have or even have the education. Now, in defense, what I do say is that I recognize that you have people in Africa who talk bad about Americans. Oh, they're lazy. They don't want to go to work. But then you have Blacks who talk about Africans. Look at them Bigfoot Africans, all dirty and nasty. They probably in huts. Just rhetoric nonsense. You're going to have that from every corner. But that does not mean the person you're hearing that nonsense from speaks for everybody. And that's the point that gets missed. We'll read a couple more things here. Core arguments, criticisms. Lineage versus diaspora. Opponents argue that the FBA designation is a precise genealogical and political tool meant to secure targeted reparations for the specific legacy of American slavery, Jim Crow, and the Reconstruction era. But the problem again here, I have lineage tied to that. FBA seems to think that they're the only ones with lineage tied to this era. And when they speak of lineage, they even get the idea and the aspect of lineage wrong also. Lineage means that you have a direct and continuous connection to an origin. But as I said before, FBA, how can you claim to have an origin when you denounce your African heritage? You are essentially on an island. As I said before, this is equivalent to waking up on an island with no boat that took you there or a boat to take you off of. This maroon logic that they operate off of. But more and more you see people going on with it. So we talked about the othering previously or just above, but again, here it is. You want to read it for yourselves. Let's get on with the get on. Now, another thing that FBA routinely engages in is the theft of African American icons, attempting to claim them to be FBA because they have no icons. Black icons were recognized as being foundational to the building of America, never self-identified as being associated with the modern socio-political foundation of Black American movement. But at the same time, a lot of them never claimed that they were African American either. But as I said before, African American was a term when they existed. That term was around when Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Gabriel Prosser, Nat Turner, W.E. Du Bois. All these folks existed in a period where African American, Afro-American, Afro-American were documented, but were not used because of other terms that I mentioned before that were actually choice expressions that whites want to use to describe us. Historically recognized Black figures who helped build America predate the 21st century coinage of the foundational Black American term. Icons like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King Jr. identified as Negro, colored, or Black American during their struggle through universal liberation, civil rights, or Pan-African solidarity, rather than this specific modern internet era lineage label. Now notice, Negro, colored, or Black American. That is accurate. That is a descriptor of African American, although they did not use the term African American. However, if I said African descendant, boom, it's a lock. Where you going? No place. So we have Frederick Douglass, fought against slavery and for citizenship, aligning with universal human rights and abolitionist networks. FBA wouldn't do that. Harriet Tubman canceled bondage through direct action on the Underground Railroad without modern nationalist or delineation acronyms. Notice, delineation is being used properly when you're talking about specify. Delineation does not mean separate. It means to specify or to distinguish between. Martin Luther King championed a multiracial beloved community and global human rights rather than isolated ethnic nationalism. Like I said, man, I really hate the fact that I didn't get any of these FBA clown answers here tonight, but I'm sure once I put this back out online, I'll get the comments that are required. Now, here is a man that they routinely claim to be FBA, but they missed the point that Malcolm X was a staunch Pan-Africanist. I can bring up pages that demonstrate this. So it always befuddles me when I hear FBA talk about Martin Luther King was FBA, Harriet Tubman was FBA, and of course, Malcolm X, he was FBA, FBA forever. No, none of them were not. But that's just the contradiction that you find with these folks. Malcolm X transitioned from Black nationalism to a broader international human rights framework tied to the global African diaspora. Once he saw what was going on with the Nation of Islam and he freed himself from the hypocrisy of Elijah Muhammad, he became a different man. Everybody loves to talk about pre-Mecca Malcolm, but nobody talks about post-Mecca Malcolm, the man he was after he came back and his eyes were opened about Islam, other than what he had learned, the racial slanted Islam that the NOI taught. He was a completely different person after that. But again, if you have not read certain books or even heard the lectures of Dr. John Henry Clark or even Dr. Yosef Ben Yakadin, who spoke of interactions and discussions that Malcolm X had, you wouldn't know these things. Malcolm X is always depicted as being one who was violent, when in actuality, nothing he ever did or was a part of ever resulted in violence. His words were aggressive. But again, pre-Mecca Malcolm is not the same man as the one who came back from Mecca. I'll drop it right there. Different show. So I went on further. I said, provide a list of prominent African Americans who would not support FBA ideology based on their lives lived. As I just said before, you've got Blacks who would have nothing to do with FBA that FBA openly claims as being, they were FBA. No, they were not. Never were. But again, when you lack credibility in your movement, you will go out and you will usurp and you will pretty much steal from someone else to gain the credibility that you do not have. And that's pretty much the way that the FBA operates. If anyone from FBA is watching this, hit me up. I always leave my email out here. Let me know if you got smoke with me. prepare for that bonfire. Prominent African American historical figures whose life work centered on global Pan-Africanism, international solidarity, and multiracial coalition building would likely have rejected the insular, lineage-restricted framework of the foundational Black American ideology. FBA ideology explicitly defines Black identity and specific political claims around U.S. chattel slavery lineage, while often distancing itself from the broader African diaspora. As I said before, they're trying to create this narrow pathway to say that, well, if you want a slave in America, then you need to get out. This is our home. No, it is not. It is not your home, FBA. You sound just like white supremacists who claim this is our land. Hell, you even have white supremacists claiming that they are indigenous to America. Which begs the question, FBA, if you're indigenous to America and white supremacists say they're indigenous to America, what does that make the actual people who are indigenous to America? Damn sure gonna have to have a show on it. Anywho, W.E. Du Bois, Malcolm X again, Marcus Garvey, Shirley Chisholm, Bayard Rustin, just to name a few folks who are always claimed as FBA but are not. So that's a lot to read here, but we're kind of behind. We're already at an hour, so you really need to push. But again, type in what you see here inside of your favorite search engine, and you should get something similar because, again, AI takes it upon itself to try and provide a definition that goes past what you're asking, but then almost as if they're trying to, I don't want to say play both sides of the field, but trying to equal and balance everything out. Some things can be balanced. So someone on TikTok had asked me if I was going to mention Shirley Chisholm, which yes, I am at the moment. Just something brief here because somebody asked, but I'm pretty sure the individual who did is not even here. Oh, just a second. Bear with me just for a second. Let me jump on TikTok. I know these folks still here talking crazy. I'm gonna get it sparked. Words. Oh yeah, these folks are still jumping off over here. Yeah, after you have. And my comments still blowing up on TikTok. Let me see if I can redirect this traffic over here. All right. YouTube. Bear with me, folks. Here, I'm trying to be a little bit crafty. I'm sure this will be appreciated by everyone. Just a second, Love Truth. I see that you've asked a question. I'll get back to you in just a moment, man. Just seeing what we can do to spice things up a little bit. Right. And here is the link. Here I am. All right, so let's just see what happens there. All right, getting back to it. How does the one-drop rule pertain to reparations? I realize the term may be considered offensive, but by some no harm intended. Of course not. So the one-drop rule says that if you have one drop of blood anywhere in your system, that makes you Black. That's just pretty much the whole deal there, right? Then and there, it just makes you black based upon that one drop rule. So the thing here that FBA wants to do is say that, well, I don't care if you have one drop rule in you, one drop of blood that makes you black in you. If you were not a slave on American soil, then you shouldn't be looking for reparations over here. Go back to your own country. But the thing here is that slavery was a global deal. And as I said before, this whole concept of reparations that FBA is working off of, who says that the way they are formulating it is viable? No one gave them the keys to the kingdom. No one said, FBA, you can go ahead and decide who does and does not qualify for reparations. Absolutely not. Especially being that they themselves don't see themselves as being African descendant. When again, reparations is based upon those who are descendants of slaves, African slaves, African American. So therefore, if you don't call yourself African American, why in the hell are you trying to recoup reparations from enslaved Africans? Makes no sense. All right, so let's get on to the next tag here. So as I was saying, I was talking about Shirley Chisholm. So Shirley Chisholm's personal ideology would have rejected the ideology of foundational Black American rhetoric. Why am I putting this up here? Because Shirley Chisholm was somebody else that FBA would always claim that, oh, she's FBA. But then here's the issue. When they found out Marcus Garvey was from the islands, they dropped him real fast. Started calling him all types of tethers and shit. I don't know how they feel about Shirley Chisholm, but hey, Shirley Chisholm, her parents were Caribbean. I think from the ages of 5 to 9, when her parents went from New York back to the islands, she was there from the age of 5 to 9, then came back to the States. But even then, her heritage is per se not African American. I'm sure she became naturalized as African American, but when she was in office, she made sure to say that I am not just here for blacks. I am here for everyone. And that's how she got down while she was in office. She was a benefactor for everyone. Take note of it. Shirley Chisholm's inclusive coalition-based political philosophy grounded her in Barbadian American heritage, intersectional feminism, and broad-based democratic socialism would have fundamentally conflicted with the insular lineage exclusive parameters of modern foundational Black American rhetoric. Damn, yo. So again, we see where it talks about her being for universal solidarity, immigrant and diaspora inclusion. Oh yeah, FBA. She was not your gal. She was not your gal. But again, she is someone that FBA would routinely claim as being FBA. So I thought of it from another perspective. Who are we dealing with, right? Who are these foundational Black Americans? So this is what I typed in after doing some research and reading of the folks that you see making these ass-hatted claims. Well, you African. When did you become American? I was American when I was born, just like you. Disruptive, non-conforming, poor achieving, financially disparate individuals generally gravitate towards disruptive ideologies. Then I added someone to be specific of a disruption, foundational Black American socio-political movement. And this is what came back. The foundational Black American framework appeals to some economically and socially alienated individuals by offering a distinct lineage-based identity and a targeted focus on reparations. Critics argue that it is insular anti-immigrant rhetoric, mirrors populist or nationalist grievance politics. And that's what you have FBA putting out here. It's nothing but grievances. When you hear them talk about, oh, you tethers are just trying to take away the successes and all the things that we've done to build the country, what have you done? And then they love to call people tethers. So to which I respond, FBA generally self-tethers themselves to the backs of African Americans with distinctions. Those who have accomplished and achieved and been awarded publicly for their efforts. And we're going to get to some folks here in a moment. But again, they self-tether themselves to the backs of African Americans with distinctions and claim to be the blueprint when in actuality, and facts are shown, they are merely stealing the blueprints from us. When I say us, I'm talking about African Americans, aka African descendants. FBA, get your hands out of my heritage. Core appeal of the FBA movement. Lineage-focused grievance directs frustration toward a specific historical claim of uncompensated labor and systemic exclusion in the U.S. I mean, the nerve of these cats trying to say that, well, it was blacks or FBA, we built this nation. We weren't paid for our work. Keep talking about you weren't paid for your work. There was no FBA work on anything. When Africans were brought to America, there were no nukes, there were no alphas, there were no kappas, there were no Baptists, there were no Methodists. No, they were just Africans who had been stolen, kidnapped. It does not matter where the boat dropped us off. The concern that we should all have is where the boats took us from. That's Dr. John Henry Clark's statement. FBA doesn't get that, but as I said before, I am not trying to change FBA's mindset. I want everybody else watching me, whether it's live or here later on in the replay, that FBA has no icons. They have no lineage. They have no heritage. They have nothing except the spoils they take from those who have achieved. Let's look at, should I read this? We'll do this one more time for the in-group solidarity. Rejects broad Pan-African or multi-ethnic coalitions in favor of an exclusive native-born tribal identity. Simple explanations. Offers straightforward scapegoating of broader immigrant groups for complex structural and economic disparities. Nothing more to say. I shall put into this. But again, quick scroll, type it in, see what you get back. So I'm just having a field day at this point. I'm just throwing stuff in. Let's keep going here. FBA formally discriminates against the Black immigrant community, primarily those of African heritage. The ideological movement known as Foundation of Black Americans frequently expresses sharp delineation and friction. Notice when delineation is used here, they're using it accurately, as in specify. Expresses sharp delineation where they want to specify the difference between them and somebody else, which is bigotry, and friction towards the Black immigrant community, particularly those of African heritage. Rather than an institutional body, FBA is an online, social, and political concept whose adherents emphasize lineage tied directly to U.S. chattel slavery, often creating ideological division within the broader diaspora. They've got no want to look at unity or solidarity amongst the diaspora. They're only considering what they can do to get their hands on reparations. Well, here's what we can do to make sure that we get it. But if you're from Africa, you're from Nigeria, no, you need to get out of here. You can't be a part of this. But what they seem to forget, and I mentioned this to folks at a couple of shows back, look up the term saltwater African. Let me put it in the chat. Saltwater Africans were native Africans born on the continent. And what people don't realize, even up to this moment right now, there was a native African, not on every plantation, but on a plantation somewhere in America. There was always a native born African. And they never talk about that in history. Now, the reason why around 1807, 1808, when they declared international slavery to be illegal, you had the domestic slave trade that was still going on. But just like in Prohibition, what did they do when the moonshine could not be sold during the hours of daylight? They took it underground. So even though the slave trade from the international perspective was supposedly stopped, it wasn't. They just stopped doing it in the daylight hours where they can get caught. Not only were slaves being smuggled domestically, they were still bringing Africans in to the country. So from the very first moment that blacks from Africa, because they didn't bring slaves over here. They brought engineers, they brought teachers, they brought doctors, they brought pretty much anyone who had any type of skill, farmers, agriculturalists. They brought all these folks to America. They didn't bring idiots over here. They brought established individuals who, through systemic oppression, racism, and the sharp tongue of a bullwhip, made a lot of these great men and women who came here with knowledge from the ancestral lands idiots over the years. And we're having a hard time still to this day recovering. If you don't believe me, look at FBA. But as I said, there's always been a native African. There was always a native African that was on U.S. soil all throughout slavery, up until the last ship docked, Mobile, Alabama, July 9th, 1860. I believe the ship was called the Clotilda. If you look online, look up Africa Town. And you can find that in Alabama. These are folks who are the last of the native saltwater Africans to arrive in America, who built a community. Now, if you want to talk about straight, pure Africans, that's where these folks are descended from. Now, of course, anybody else like me or any other black over the years, if they were born in America, they are still Africans. Now, they're African descendant, but they're closer to Native American, Native African than a lot of people would be. Now, I know a lot of that is probably growing out with each generation that comes along, but understand that community was started by Native Africans who were brought over here and left to fend for themselves. Look up an individual by the name of Cudjo Lewis. I don't know if I'm spelling his name right. I know they've got his memoir somewhere online, but you should. Cudjo. Again, I don't know if I'm spelling his name right. Work with me. I'm sure you'll get some type of correction if you put it in here. But look up that individual. Look up Africa Town and educate yourselves if you weren't familiar of this. FBA isn't. So again, what are the core components of the arguments? Lineage recognition. Proponents argue for a distinct identity to separate the specific historical and legal impacts of American slavery, Jim Crow, and civil rights. And that we've seen this. It's going to be pretty repetitive at some point. Criticism and concerns. Xenophobic rhetoric. Critics and sociologists note that online spaces associated with the movement, again, FBA, frequently slip into nativist, anti-immigrant, and Afrophobic rhetoric, including referring to continental Africans with derogatory terms. Erosion of solidarity. Commenters point out that the rhetoric undermines Pan-African solidarity by framing immigrants as economic competitors or outsiders rather than shared targets of systemic racism. And that's the ignorance of FBA. Dr. Clark once told a story where he said that he had some students in his class. They were arguing about blackness. One was from Africa, one was from America, one was from, funny enough, the Caribbean. So he says to these young men, go outside and wait for a cab and come in tomorrow and give me your experience. So the three young men did so. They came back in the next day and said, damn, it took almost 20 calves passing me before I got one. And funny enough, this is the story that he told. He said that the other two young men said the exact same thing. So then he had a little white girl who was in his class and said, hey, I want you to do the same. She came back the next day and said, hey, I had a cab in just a minute. I got out there and cab stopped. And Dr. Clark said, so I want you guys to understand this lesson if you didn't get it. The best Pan-Africanist in the world is a racist, because when he looks at any of you, he didn't see African, he didn't see Caribbean, he didn't see Native, he didn't see Black. He saw the same thing. Nigga. He saw the exact same thing. Some Black people. So it doesn't matter where we come from, because we are all going to be construed to be the same. And for whatever reason, FBA has got their ideology based on the fact that for some reason you can look at them. Well, you should be able to see that I'm FBA. No, you can't. That's like saying 10 lions walking down the street. Out of 10, one of them won't eat you. Which one is it? You can't tell. But nonetheless, that nativist nonsense, they are a poison to us. All right, so what are we, about an hour some change in? Let's go ahead and step it up a little bit. So these are a lot of the claims I want to get into now about what what antics that FBA gets into. So let's look at some of these claims. Let's look at this. Oh, well, we've done so many things. We've achieved so much that you tethers are trying to take from us. What is it that us supposed tethers are taking? FBA anti-African rhetoric misassociates freedmen with their cause while overlooking the fact the freedmen were formerly enslaved Africans. Now, who's heard this? Where they like to talk about, well, we are descendant of the freedmen. Well, wait a minute, you can't be. Because the freedmen were formerly enslaved Africans. And some African Americans are descendants of enslaved Africans. But the freedmen were not FBA. Excuse me. The rhetoric associated with the foundational Black American framework frequently attempts, notice the word, attempts to separate the lineage of American freedmen from the broader African diaspora. While historically, those freedmen were the direct descendants of enslaved Africans whose labor and heritage linked them fundamentally to the continent, as in the continent of Africa. All right, so cross these cats up the next time you hear them talking about, I'm descended from freedmen. Right, you are descended from Africans. No, I'm not. The freedmen were enslaved in America. They were freedmen. And you get into this circular argument. Understand, folks, it's right here in front of you if you're reading this. The freedmen were formerly enslaved Africans. Done. Oh, ideological delineation and lineage. Again, delineation means specify, not separate. Proponents of the FBA designation argue for a distinct lineage-based identity, Yeah, so yeah, this is the same thing. Critics note the approach adopts an exclusionary stance. Yeah. Historical contradictions. Here we go. The historical identity of American freedmen is rooted in an African origin, a fact documented across generations of genealogical and cultural continuity. But yet you never hear FBA speak of this. For some reason, when they say I'm descended from freedmen, it's supposed to mean something like these folks were never affiliated with African heritage. Rhetoric that opposes an absolute disconnect. I like this. Posits an absolute disconnect from Africa, overlooks how the historical struggles of freedmen share a common root with the global diaspora. Observers emphasize that contrasting a localized American lineage with an anti-African sentiment creates intra-diasporic friction rather than addressing the systemic structures that shape the African American experience. Right? The African American experience. Please, folks, make sure that you capture this entry right here. Let me open that up a little bit. Make sure you take this for your own, put it in a web browser, and then take it everywhere you go. I'm descended from a freedman. Yes, you are descended from an African. So now we get into this wild shit where they talk about, oh, well, we are a lineage. A lineage of what? As I said before, a lineage requires you to have a direct and continuous connection to an origin. FBA, what is your origin after you denounce your African heritage? What are you left with? Is it historically accurate to claim lineage with less than 30 years of existence without a historical origin? Claiming historical lineage for an organization, family, or tradition with less than 30 years of existence and no documented origin is generally not historically accurate. It lacks empirical proof, violates basic genealogical and institutional standards, and often represents an invented tradition rather than a verified descent. I'm not going to read any more on that because I believe the point should be made. Slow scroll. And hey, we just had this conversation about the freedmen, did we not? Were formerly enslaved blacks who called themselves freedmen, descendants of enslaved Africans. I just want to be real specific about this. Yes, formerly enslaved black people who were called or called themselves freedmen or freed women were indeed descendants of enslaved Africans, though the term also specifically applies to those enslaved by Native American tribes, because there were Indian tribes who enslaved blacks as well, who possessed mixed or distinct cultural lineages. Origins of the term. Emancipation. After the American Civil War and the passage of the 13th Amendment, millions of black people freed from bondage across the United States were legally designated and self-identified as freedmen. African lineage. Excuse me. The vast majority of these individuals were the generational descendants of people forcibly brought from Africa via the transatlantic slave trade. So you're talking first generation, maybe second at best. So again, FBA, how are you claiming freedmen are FBA when it says here that these folks were direct African descendants? Y'all are some clowns. Slow scroll. Now, this by far is the most egregious and outrageous shit that you have got to hear. I remember Rob Platinum and I were in a show almost a year ago where some guy came up talking about, well, you know, FBA, we are indigenous to America because when America became a country, we was here. Or that's just what he sounded like to me. That's what I remember. real gruff and ignorant. Anyway, this guy had the audacity to make this claim that because slaves were breathing air when America became a country, that made them indigenous. That's all types of wrong. All types of wrong gamesmanship and just some absolute nonsense. FBA claiming indigenous status by virtue of proximity during the founding of America is a disingenuous attempt at manufacturing heritage, lineage, and a false identity the scientific community recognizes as intentionally misleading. Claims that foundational Black Americans are the pre-Columbian or true indigenous peoples of the Americas by virtue of presence or proximity during the founding of the nation are widely rejected by the scientific, genetic, and historical communities. These assertions contradict extensive data showing that modern Black Americans predominantly chased their genetic and genealogical lineage to West and Central Africa via the transatlantic slave trade. Boom. Again, I hate the fact that you guys couldn't have been here live, but I'm sure as shit this will give you something to discuss. I'm gonna come back and clown you all in with facts. All right, so therefore, it now goes into the scientific and genetic aspect of it, which again, slow scroll. We're not going to sit here and read, but I'm going to make sure I put this out into where you can see it. But let's do this part. Lineage versus ingenuity. Or better yet, ingenuity. Yeah, ingenuity. While standard definitions designate FBA as a legitimate socio-political and lineage-based term for descendants of American chattel slavery, truly, it's not. Conflating this distinct American forced identity with indigenous sovereignty over the land is historically inaccurate. I'm gonna have to snip that down and save that someplace later because I like that. Conflating this distinct American forged identity with the indigenous sovereignty over the land is historically inaccurate. Lucktooth or Lucktooth, how you pronounce that? Are you still around? That's all right, man. If you catch the replay, you'll still hear the same thing I'm saying right now. Consensus on identity fraud. Scholars and tribal authorities emphasize that true indigeneity cannot be self-declared through geographic proximity or pseudo-historical revisionism. It requires verifiable genealogical ties and collective political recognition by sovereign indigenous nations themselves. So therefore, these pretendians out here, no, you cannot call yourself indigenous if you have not gone through the steps that are used to verify indigenous nature and background. Speak and they shall come. How do you see actual reparations being negotiated, quantified, and enacted? How will African Americans prove their legacy to be enslaved? Where will the African American leadership come from? So again, we had this conversation before, I want to say about an hour ago, but when you talk about how do Americans prove their legacy to the enslaved, all I have to do is breathe air. There were no blacks, aka African Americans, aka Africans, on this soil until my ancestors were kidnapped and brought here. So therefore, proving my legacy or my lineage, all I have to do is be what I am, black and alive. That's it. Now, if you buy into this FBA nonsense, well, if you came over here and slavery's already up and gone, you can't get no reparations. So let's play that card. Let's say that someone is here from Nigeria. Now, slavery began in, say, the 15th century. And I'm not talking specifically about the slavery that Africa endured under the Arabs, which started back in the, we'll say, the 7th century or so. I'm not talking about that. There's stages of slavery. People don't realize that the first folks to enslave us and take us off of African soil were the Arabs. When you look at people over in India, in Saudi Arabia, anything like that, and they look as dark as us, but they have that straight hair, that cat is African descendant. But it's never discussed. But we'll get around to that. But again, anyone coming from Africa to America, when I look at slavery as a whole, again, I'm not talking about American slavery. I'm talking about slavery around the world. If someone came from Africa and they weren't a slave in America, but they can trace their heritage back to the west coast of India, where where Africans were kidnapped and kept in what they call, I want to say, the barracoons. All right, this was the place where the slaves, excuse me, I don't know why I keep saying slaves. This was the place where the Africans were kept and sometimes forced to stay in their own country for 2 and 3 months, waiting for the slave ships from America to come back to load them on and kidnap them and take them to America. So enslaved on your own ground, on your own soil. So if anyone from Africa were to come over to America and they could trace their lineage to someone who was stolen from Africa and brought to America, hey, I don't care if you're standing on African soil or standing on American soil. You are entitled to reparations. In my mind, that's my perspective of how it should work, because it does not matter if this guy came from Africa, came to America, and his family was not enslaved inside of America. If he had family that was kidnapped from Africa and brought to America to be a slave, and he can trace his lineage to that person, hey, he's got money coming to him. But the problem here is that there was so much enslavement of Africans around the world, people don't want to pay it. That's why you don't see a lot of talk about reparations amongst the Black community, because somebody would go broke. There are African immigrants that came post-slavery without documentation. Okay, yeah, so I guess that's something that I was just talking about a moment ago here. About those who came after slavery. Yes, they came without slavery, without documentation. However, the documentation they may not have on them, it does not mean that the census, or at least the shipping manifests that kept a record of folks that brought over, cannot be found. So therefore, if this person does not have his papers on him direct, the question is, where did your family come into America? Where did they enter? And if you've been looking and listening, there's a lot of folks who have been able to find logs, even shipping manifests, of when Blacks were brought over here. And some of these go pretty far back. So just because I don't have documentation on me right now doesn't necessarily mean that it cannot be found. So a lot of this stuff is centered around documentation. So I can't really speak to that effect. I just know that whenever anything is needed to be verified, the first thing to talk about is, hey, where are your papers? So that is a question that I cannot answer for you directly. I can give you my thought and my take on it. But as far as how it actually pans out, I guess we'll both have to see. Now, who will pay for the reparations? Easy. The people responsible for the enslavement. So if you haven't been keeping up what you want to wear here, I know Ghana has passed a motion looking for reparations to be paid out. You have Blacks in the Caribbean who are looking for the English crown to admit slavery, to look at their part in this, and therefore pushing for reparations. So if you're talking about who would owe reparations, it would be England, it would be Spain, it would be Portugal. Those were the big three. Now, I'm not sure how the Arabs to get into this, because, again, they were slaving longer than anyone. They got started again back in the 7th century. So I'm not sure how far it will work over there. But if you're talking about the main slavers of Africans, again, it would be the English, it would be the Spaniards, and it would be the Portuguese. So those are the folks who would pay for it. Not saying that they will. All right, let's go ahead and jump. Oh, we're getting there. We're over halfway now. So, was there an assortment of Africans held in bondage who identified themselves specifically as foundation of Black Americans? Now, the reason why I put this up here is because I keep hearing this nonsense from FBA. Well, no, I can trace my lineage back to slavery. We were slaves. We were unpaid labor. What are you talking about? FBA was not unpaid labor. Slaves, all right? Slaves, African descendants, those descended from enslaved Africans. Those are the people who worked for free. Do not confuse yourselves, FBA, as being those folks. Oh, yes. Yes, those countries would be broke as hell. Yes, they would. And that's the whole reason why the conversation of reparations for slavery keeps getting pushed away, because nobody wants to pay for it. But think about this. I did a show a couple months ago. I called it Holocaust is Not an Ethnicity. And the reason why I said that is because you had 5 major actions that could be considered Holocaust that occurred before World War II, the period specifically 1939 to 1945, where you had the rat bastard Nazi Party folks damn near extinguishing the Jewish community. But again, when you hear the word Holocaust, that's what they associate Holocaust with. No one thinks about the Tano Indian tribes or the Creole that were almost wiped out by Columbus and his men. Nobody thinks about the Trail of Tears in America. Nobody thinks about the Black Wars that occurred in what's this, Tasmania. It's off the coast of Australia, at least an area over there. No one thinks about the slave trade. No one thinks about that. No one thinks about when the Europeans went to India. No one gives any thoughts about these instances where you have what could be considered a legitimate Holocaust, because these folks were not white. So as a result, it's pushed under the table, or if you have a discussion about it, it's explained away, but no one wants to call it Holocaust. But the point I was making is that you saw that there was restitution made for the Jews. You saw there was restitution made for the Japanese who were victims of Japanese internment. There was reparation for that. But when you talk about reparations for the slavery of African or Native Africans, or let's say African descendants, when you talk about reparation for that, nobody wants to touch it, because just like you said, Lux, they would be broke as hell. So that is kicked around constantly. Hell, just recently they were able to get folks to say, yes, slavery was wrong. Everyone except what? The U.S., England, and was it Venezuela? Or was it it was Argentina, I'm sorry. Those 3 folks said, nah, we're not admitting anything. Yeah, slavery, yeah, we have nothing to say. But anywho, going back to what I'm saying. No, enslaved Africans held in bondage did not identify themselves as foundational Black Americans, because that is a modern term. So when FBA says that, yeah, we were back there building countries, and we were the foundation of the nation, we were the blueprint, we were the backbone. No, you were not. The term foundational Black American is a modern social and political, can't read it, theologian popularized in the late 2010s and 2020s on social media. Actually, I guess they're getting confused with ADOS, but still one and the same ignorance. Excuse me. It was coined to describe contemporary Black Americans who are direct descendants of persons emancipated from chattel slavery within the United States, using the label to distinguish the specific lineage from more recent Black immigrants. So you see, this is just repetitive at this point. It's the same thing over and over. We know that FBA denounced their African heritage. We know that they've got no claim to reparations, if you look at it, because of the fact they claim they're not African. Now, if we want to be technical and play it down to the wire and be somewhat disingenuous but still factual, we could do that. We could literally do it. But the fact of the matter here is that there was no one on a plantation calling themselves FBA because they were African American. Because again, in 1782, that was a term. Just because they didn't use it didn't mean the term didn't exist. Afro-American, Afro-American, but instead they were colored, pink. Maybe Negro, but we know which one that the slaves primarily were called. Don't get this mess twisted. All right, we roll. Let's pick it up. Let's pick it up. So remember I said something earlier about lineage. Lineage requires you to have a direct, continuous connection to an origin. The FBA has no origin because they denounce African heritage. So lineage requires one to have a distinct and continuous connection to an origin. Lineage means a continuous line of descent or ancestry from a specific common ancestral origin. So I ask anyone, either the two folks who've been hanging in, I appreciate that, or even yourself, Luck Tough. How do you pronounce your name? Is it Luck Tough or Luke Tooth? If I'm butchering it, I apologize. But let's ask ourselves, let's be honest right about now. What common ancestor does FBA have? Loose tooth. Boy, you better go see a dentist if it's like that. All right. Loose tooth. Appreciate that. So I know I didn't sound anything but crazy the way that I was pronouncing. What are you, a dentist? Just curious. But be that as it may, again, if we come down and look at it, just take the comedy out for a second. FBA has the exact same ancestors that I do. And if you recall in one of the previous slides, just because you come out and make a statement that you are not this, it does not mean at all what it means. So if FBA makes a claim, we're not African, oh bullshit, forgive my language. FBA is African descendant. Now notice, I'm not saying African American anymore at the moment. I'm saying African descendant because it's time to stop the BS. All right, let's lock it in, folks. Anyone who is my shade and you were born in America, you are African descendant. Now, regardless of you calling yourself Black, African American, or whatever you want to do, if we put that all to the side and we just use the term African descendant, which is an official term, we're all locked in. We are descendants from Africa. We are not native African, but we are still descendants of the continent. And again, talk your way out of that FBA. And what are the key aspects of lineage? Tracing biological, familial, or dynastic descent through generations. Continuity, requiring an unbroken link from the past to the present. Again, FBA, you don't have a link to speak of. You got nothing. You've cornered yourselves with your nonsense. Pointing back to a foundational root, founder, or starting point. FBA, where's your starting point? I mean, damn, if we had to talk about lineage, your starting point would be what, 5 minutes ago? But I'll bet you money, once I chop this up and I put this back out on TikTok, I'm going to have the same clowns trying to run through talking this nonsense to me. Oh, we ain't African. See, you tethers just trying to take what we've already built. You ain't built shit. Woo, man, y'all got to excuse the language for me. These folks to get under your skin. All right, so anything else to slow scroll on? Nope, not too much. That's pretty much it. Straight to the point. All right, boom. So we're looking at the claims again. Oh, I've got more. Oh, it's a damn shame these folks didn't show up. I really was hoping for a large crowd tonight, but you know what? That's okay. We'll pull the flies in with the replay. Claiming to be or have lineage without an origin is false and intentionally deceptive. Claiming lineage without proof is false and deceptive. It misleads people about family history and heritage. Why lineage needs proof. You got people on here, which we'll take a quick look at here. We get to it if we got enough time left. But we got folks on TikTok talking about, well, we don't need to have documentation. This is coming from FBA. The folks are always asking, who are your people? Where are your people from? Are you an immigrant? They always want someone to have some documentation for them. But then all of a sudden, well, we don't need documentation. We're the original people and all this other nonsense. Facts matter. Real history requires clear proof. False claims hurt family and group trust. Birth and death papers show the truth. I can't be any more distinct than that. That's right down the middle, right? That's right over home plate. That is the strike zone. Clown your way out of that, FBA. So of course, I have to put a little bit extra on. Plantation slaves were descended from enslaved Africans who were kidnapped from their ancestral home of Africa. And why did I put this in here? Because of the fact that you hear FBA talk about, I can trace my lineage back to slavery. All right, so who were these slaves that you're tracing your lineage to? They were descendants of enslaved Africans, but you never hear FBA talk about that. They talk about, oh, I had this slave person in my lineage. Oh, they're done. Well, I'm foundational Black American. Enslaved people on American plantation were the descendants of millions of Africans who were captured, kidnapped, and forcibly transported by the transatlantic slave trade from the 16th through the 19th centuries. Over generations, as the import of captive labor was supplemented and eventually superseded by natural increase under hereditary chattel slavery laws, these descendants formed deep-rooted communities across the Americas. And I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. Slow scroll. I don't know how we get into these crazy ass conversations with these delusional FBA clownettes. I just don't know where they get this stuff from. But it's a lot of rhetoric that they get off of Reddit and most likely just in these spaces on TikTok or YouTube where you go and you have people who will actually sit here and tell these lies. Or should I say these distortions, these factual distortions, type of shit that Charlie Kirk would do. He wouldn't tell the whole truth. He would omit some of the facts, but fill it in with his own perspective and thereby distort reality. But if you didn't know what was being said because you didn't know your history, it would sound okay to you. This is what we call spurious conversation. It's a lie, it's not true, it's nonsensical. But if you don't know what you're listening to, it sounds feasible. And that kid got away with a lot of it. All right, picking it up. So you always hear, again, FBA talking about, well, we've got so many things that we're known for. Look at our accomplishments. You tethers just want us to share what we've created. FBA lacks recorded societal achievements. Foundational Black American ideology is an online social concept rather than a traditional civic institution or historical culture. Critics and community discussions point out that it focuses primarily on digital rhetoric, lineage-based distinction, and advocacy for specific reparations policies rather than producing independent physical infrastructure, legislative bodies, or tangible societal milestones. They've got nothing. Zero. Wax on, bullshit off. They have nothing to speak of, but yet they're the most boastful and prideful idiots I have ever seen who've got no accomplishments to their names, but speak about everything that they've done and that they are the blueprint for. Really? Slow scroll. So it got to the point, I got tired of hearing this nonsense of, well, here's what we've done. What do you tethers have? We produce such and such. Okay, platitudes. Give me a name. I have thrown out maybe 4 or 5 times today inside this TikTok chat we're going to visit in a moment. FBA, give me an icon. I get platitudes instead. Still no names. So I asked a list to be provided of African Americans under the headings of innovation and science, leadership and activism, and culture and arts. African Americans have shaped history through groundbreaking inventions, bold civil rights leadership, and rich cultural contributions. Key figures in these areas include scientists, activists, and artists who changed the world. Notice there's no mention of FBA in here. FBA has not changed the world. They desire to, but they won't because they have no history, culture, or icons. Finally. And here we go. Hey, I was wondering if and when you'd ever show up to make this exciting. Folks, I want you to meet Adrielle Hastings. She is one of the FBA incompetents I've talked about, who will provide you no names, no accomplishments, but will expect you to give her something to work with. And this is her response. What's the point in giving you an icon? Give me a West African icon. Why are you asking for a West African icon? Robert Campbell. All right, there's one. But still, I asked you before, give me an FBA icon. I've watched you run loose with my chat girlfriend, and you still have not been able to do so because you have none. But I've given you one to work with, so I'm going to go on about my business. So as I said before, folks, you have nothing that FBA can give you by way of an icon unless they appropriate one of African-American icons that I'm about to list right now. George Washington Carver. Improved farming with hundreds of uses for peanuts and sweet potatoes. Now, for those of us old enough to remember Saturday Night Live in the 80s, Eddie Murphy had a quick skit on this where he talked about George Washington Carver going crazy trying to play a piano or play a record using a peanut as a needle or something like that. But still, we have actual icons that we can list out here. It's Adrielle. Madam C.J. Walker built a major hair care company and became a self-made millionaire. Who is Mr. Carver's West African relative? Why would that be anything that would be worth discussing? See, this is that Gish Gallop that I'm talking about. Now, if you're not familiar with Gish Gallop, which is what Adrielle continually engages in, Gish Gallop is continually asking questions, trying to overwhelm the adversary with as many questions as possible to either see if they can answer it or ask so many that they can't answer it. So when they go away, they think they've won something. See? Check it out. 1, 2, 3. And this will go on. This will continue on because she actually thinks that there'll be time spent with me answering questions and then her asking another one. There's no question I need to answer because you haven't answered anything that I've been asking you for almost a week. So I'm going to let you sit here and flounder. I don't have a problem with you being here. Understand that I'm conducting a show and you can ask as many questions as you want because you won't get an answer from me because you haven't been able to answer a simple question that I've posed to you 5 or 6 times. And folks, let me give you the question that I gave her that she still can't answer, that she will deflect away from and throw out other superfluous questions that I'm not going to bother with. Name and FBA icon. This is the one question that I've given her and countless FBAs for almost 4 or 5 months straight, and none of them have given me anything, with the exception of Tariq's silly ass coming through trying to claim Malcolm X, John Henry Clark, Harriet Tubman, and Thurgood Marshall, and a few other folks as being FBA, to which I have shown you guys before they are not. They are not. But let's keep it going here. Garrett Morgan saved lives by inventing the gas mask and an early traffic signal. So when they talk about black inventors and traffic lights, this was the man who was responsible for that. Katherine Johnson calculated flight paths for NASA space missions with elite math skills. What was that movie? Was it Hidden Figures or something like that? I remember watching this before, where this woman's math skills was absolutely just mad crazy. I want to say it may have been Hidden Figures, but check it out. Do you mean name an icon who was born in America and all their relatives were born in America? I want you to give me anything. But again, I'm not going to wrap too much time on that because there are no FBA icons. None. Well, you're the one who's FBA. You should be able to tell me this, right? All right, so moving on. Again, it's always good to have comedy, right? So, leadership and activism. Harriet Tubman led dozens of enslaved people to freedom on the Underground Railroad. Again, Tariq Nasheed tried to claim that Harriet Tubman was FBA. No, she was not. Frederick Douglass fought to end slavery through powerful speeches and writings. He is not FBA, although FBA has attempted to claim him as such. Martin Luther King Jr. led protests for civil rights and racial equality, to include peaceful protest. He was claimed by Tariq Nasheed to have been FBA. No, he is not. Rosa Parks, same thing. Everybody on this list, damn near at one point in time, with the exception, I think, of Langston Hughes, was claimed to be FBA until folks like myself started pushing back. Rosa Parks sparked the Montgomery bus boycott by refusing to give up her seat, and she was not FBA. Hey, culture and arts. Langston Hughes wrote famous poems and stories during the Harlem Renaissance. Maya Angelou, Mother Maya, shared moving life stories and poetry about strength and identity. Louis Armstrong shaped the sound of American jazz with his trumpet and voice. Aretha Franklin became the legendary queen of soul with powerful vocal performances. All these folks right here. Again, we African Americans, aka African descendants, which is every black person in America, to include the silly one right now, Adrielle, if she's still here. Even she is African descendant. Notice I'm not using the term African American, Black American. No, I'm going to lock it in, as I've been saying for the last hour and some change. When you use African descendant, there is no place for anybody to go on this because we are all descended from Africa, whether you like it or not. Did these people identify as African American? And please, the conversation you had with them, were they told that they were Africans? Again, well, I'll tell you, let's do this. Let's do this for her because she is going to argue by herself. And I'm glad she came because, like I said before, folks, my job is not to convince FBA that they are ignorant. My job is to show everybody the ignorance that FBA operates from. Now, as we go back to the beginning, remember, folks, we put in the designation. African descendant is an official designation. African descendant, or people of African descent, is an official international human rights and legal designation used by bodies like the United Nations and various national governments, though it is still not a standalone census racial category in the United States. But again, it is recognized around the world that African descendant stands for people of African heritage, whether they like it or not. Again, this is the educational level of foundational Black America. Matter of fact, hey, Adrielle, do you want to come up here? What percent of the African on those ships made it to what is now North America? So again, like I said, folks, the amount of gallop you find. So what you find FBA will try and do is they will look around, look for some type of indiscriminate question that they themselves can't give an answer for, but they will ask you to answer a question that they have no answer for. They just wanted to ask it. What percentage of the Africans on those ships made it into what is now North America? Now, could I find that answer? Yes, I could. But the thing is that I'm not going to, not right about now. I want to see if she can answer her own question, because just as easily as I can go and get the answer, which all of you know that I can, let's see if they can answer their own questions. I normally don't ask a question that I can't answer for myself. And I know she can't answer it. Hey, do you want me to drop the link for you? Do you want to come up here and have this conversation? I'll tell you right now, I won't spend it trying to have a conversation with you throwing questions out in this Gist Gallop. I'm going to just look at you and ask you one question that I've asked before. Who is an FBA icon? I have given African American icons. Again, so the question now is, now we have a question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what, the 6th question. So now she's saying 4% made it over. Now, when you look at the percentage of 10 to 12 million, you ask yourself, 4% based off of 10 million, the number will make you believe that it's smaller. I'll look at it later, but I just want to see what she could come out with. So, when I come back later, I'm going to have more information, because this is something on the cuff that she threw out here looking for some type of cheap answer for me, which no, you're not going to get. Not when the fact is that you still can't answer a basic question. And no one can from FBA. No one can tell you who an actual FBA icon is, but they will always default, well, what's this in Africa? Well, what's this in Nigeria? Well, what's this answer that you can't give right now? 4% is the answer, and you know it just like I know. Well, I don't know it for sure. I'm not going to say that it is not the answer, but I'm not going to say until I take a look what the answer might actually be. I'm not saying that you aren't correct, but at the same time, I'll take a look also. I like to make sure that before I answer something, I can verify it as well. And again, you heard me say over 2 million were brought, but she's saying that there was only 400,000. So just off the cuff, we know that this is the incorrect answer. So I don't know where the math comes from, but think about this, folks. If we had, and I said before, we had slavery, we had ships that ran from 1619 all the way up until 1860, right before the Civil War, carrying no less than 100 Africans at a time. Are you really going to try and say, Ms. Adrienne, that only 400,000 Africans came to the New World over the course of 200 years? Oh, shit. I can't even do this with you right now. So let's go ahead and get back on to this, folks. 400,000 Africans over the course of 200 years came to the New World. Oh, shit. Yeah, let me get this. Oh, there we go. So, like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time entertaining this ignorance. So, where were we? Africans. Did we all? No, I think I'm a little bit further ahead. This it. Yeah, we talked about lineage, plantation slave descendants, and FBA ideology, last recorded societal achievements. Yeah, I think that's where we were. Provide a list. Okay, so moving on. So the next question I had to ask, have any rewards for cultural achievement ever been presented directly to an individual identifying themselves specifically as a foundational Black American? Funny enough, no major or official cultural achievement awards such as the Pulitzer Prize, Kennedy Center Honors, or NAACP Image Awards have records of being presented to an individual who was explicitly introduced or identified on record by the specific socio-political descriptor, foundational Black American. Oh, goodness. So context and nuance. Terminology origin. The term foundational Black American is a relatively recent grassroots socio-political identifier, coined in the late 2010s, popularized heavily by the online commentary and lineage activism to describe Black Americans who can trace their ancestry back through American system of slavery. But as I said before, these same Black Americans, aka, whether they like it or not, African descendants who trace their lineage back to slavery, they never want to give you any more information about that supposed ancestor that they trace their lineage to. And as I proved to you before, that person was African descendant. That slave they claim that they can trace their lineage back to had ancestors or people themselves who they traced their lineage to who were enslaved Africans. But you never, ever see these folks trace their stuff back. Oh, wait a minute. Let's get here. Where is he? Ask me to show up. You won't verify because you look like a Pan-African buffoon. Oh, shit. Here we go again. Were there any Black Americans stating themselves as foundational Black Americans in the 30s? She meant the 40s and 50s. Now, my audience knows the answer to this. We can tell you no. But the question is that, did you know that African American is a term that's been around since 1782? Now, if you were to go back and check the show out, you would see that. But I'm just going to give you the cliff notes right now. African American has been an expression that's been a part of America since it was coined in 1782. And it wasn't Jesse Jackson. We were Afro-American. We've been Africo-American. We've been Afro-American. But the thing is that Negro, colored, and nigger have been the terms most used. Give us the West Africans we can trace our lineage to. I will wait. Okay, fine. You can continue waiting here because, as usual, there's this deflection. Why are you concerned about West Africans? As I said before, I am African descendant, as you are. And because of the fact I am African descendant, that means that my lineage goes all the way back to Africa. Now, have I traced it back? No, I haven't traced it back. Why? Because right out of the gate, there were no Blacks, aka African descendants, in North American soil until slavery occurred. There's no mute argument. There's only a fact I presented. And here we go. Who turned the coin African American? Well, from what we know, there's no direct name given who coined it, but they know the time frame that was first introduced. But as I said before, Jesse Jackson did not term the coin African American. No, he asked for it to be revived as a descriptor to make it more, or to make our heritage more in line with what we were and what we are, African descendants. So this whole thing of, well, I want to know who coined the term. No one can tell you that. No one can tell you when the first chicken and egg came. We know that it exists, but also we know in history that, again, the term was first used in 1782 when describing a pamphlet that a Black man had written regarding the trial and arrest of Lord Cornwallis. Type in Lord Cornwallis in the year 1782. And again, we're on with the Gish Gallop. We're on with the Gish Gallop. But, we'll entertain this for a second. So Elon Musk, people will say that, is he African? Oh, you have a lot of questions, but of course, that's what you do with Gish Gallop. You know what? I'm using Gish Gallop a lot. Let me do this, folks. Let me break it and tell you what that is. Definition. Yeah. But this is exactly what we're seeing right now, Adrian. And we're just going to dip from the show for a second. So, you asked what Gish Gallop is. The Gish Gallop is a debate tactic. A speaker overwhelms an opponent by quickly throwing out many weak, false, or misleading arguments. And that's all you're doing, Gal. Weak, false, and misleading arguments have nothing to do with anything, but you'll continue throwing them out. The sheer number of claims makes it impossible to answer every point in the given time, which is why I told you folks, I'm not going to waste time with it. Named after Dwayne Gish, a creationist who used this style in debates. All right, but again, folks, that's what Gish Gallop is. And you see her engaging in that, just one question after the other. But have you ever heard the word spurious? Okay, so let's do this. Definition of spurious. So where is this? Just a moment. Lost my tab. There we go. All right, so Adriel, here we go. So spurious means fake, not genuine, or based on false reasoning. It describes claims, arguments, or objects that look real or true on the surface, but are actually false, forged, or built on bad logic. And we're getting that all right now. Look at this. Explain Gish Gallop, because you damn sure ain't explaining shit else. Now, did I not just put Gish Gallop over here, folks? Now, she's probably a couple of seconds behind, but she'll see it in a moment. Or maybe not, because if she does see it, I'm pretty sure that she'll act as if she didn't, and that it doesn't matter. Oh, yes, you showed up. I appreciate that. And you're doing what I expected you to do. You are showing everybody the nature of FBA. So this is what I was looking for you to be here for. As I said before, Gal, I'm not trying to convince you or change your mind of anything. I just need you here so everybody else can see what I talk about this ineffectiveness in logic that comes from FBA. So your being here is exactly what I wanted. You are doing what's required of you. Keep doing more. So where were we? Oh yeah, so basically, as I said, there's been no cultural achievement or anything that has been brought forth by FBA. I enjoy making sure that you give them some space to move around with. But the question is that once you do give them space, what is it that they bring to the conversation? Now, you've heard me ask a couple of times, hey, girl, you want me to drop the link for you? You can come up here and have this direct conversation with me. Now, in doing so, if I were to do that, I would want you to tell me everything about FBA that makes you blueprints. So one of the things that I would not do is sit up here and just try and have a conversation with you where you continue just throwing questions. Now, I'm past that point. I'm looking for conversation. What is it that makes FBA the blueprint? What is it about FBA that makes you Black excellence? Because I'm not seeing any of that from you, nor have I ever seen this. Oh, let me go back. Did you know the great Reverend Jesse Jackson was supposed came member of the Cherokee? So here's another mistaken fact. More Gish, more spurious. Jesse Jackson made the claim of having Indian heritage. Like myself, I have Indian ancestry, but I am not indigenous. And this is what Jesse Jackson related. But if you hear from FBA, oh, he said he was Cherokee. No, I have Cherokee ancestry in my family, but I am not indigenous. And that's the exact same thing that Jesse Jackson was phrasing. Although he may have had Cherokee heritage in his family, he was not indigenous to America. He was not a Native American. Why does the Black African population dwarf the South American, Caribbean, probably even though millions of West Africans? Because of the fact it was another location that was a slave breaking ground. The Portuguese were responsible for the African slave trade on the South American continent. And again, what easy work? You've done nothing, you've proven nothing. Well, you've proven how the logic of FBA works, which is that there is no logic. You have no icons, which you've yet to prove here. I've answered a few of the questions, but yet I've still got nothing back from icons. Now that we can clearly see. So you know what, let's go ahead and move on here, because again, everyone noticed I've answered a few of her questions, but I still haven't got the answer to the one question I asked for: name an FBA icon. And we're not going to get it. I didn't expect to. But again, you've seen what I wanted you to see of FBA behavior. Look at this. She steadily gets, see, the gish is on. What part of Africa are you indigenous to? Everyone here heard me say that I am African descendant. I was born in America. But because of the fact I was born in America, that does not mean that I have no ties to Africa. It means that I am not native African. But being that I am African descendant, I recognize that my heritage and my ancestry extends to the continent. But you get these deflective questions trying to look for answers. Got you moments. Well, what are you indigenous to? If anyone asks me what I was indigenous to, I can't say that I'm indigenous to Africa. I'm not indigenous to North America either. No, blacks are not indigenous to North America. Now, if anything, we exist on North America. We live here. We may have ancestry here, but we are not indigenous. So everyone knows. I'll tell you what, anyone who's watching the replay, make sure you put a 1 in the chat, because you heard me answer her question. Not just one, I asked a few of her questions. Maybe you were so, maybe you were so busy asking questions, you weren't listening to the answers. Again, do you want me to drop you the link so you can come up here? Because as people know who watch my show, I may not get a lot of people who show up initially, but I always get folks who may come back in the comments. So I'm not worried about people not giving any answers directly here, because I will answer them in the comments. So what is that, like the 10th question that she's asked? I tell you guys, FBA, I tell you folks, FBA will not disappoint. If they can't prove anything, they'll continue asking questions as if they've got something to say. Moving on. So next I put out here, have any awards for athletic prominence ever been presented directly to any individuals in history identifying themselves specifically as foundational Black Americans? No formal or official athletic awards in history have been presented directly to individuals under the specific modern socio-political identifier, foundational Black American, as the term is a recent specific 21st century ideological and genealogical descriptor rather than a historical identity category used by governing sports bodies when bestowing historical awards. However, numerous legendary Black American athletes whose lineages and descents align with the proponents defined as foundational Black Americans have received high-profile athletic honors, such as Olympic gold medals, MVP awards, and Hall of Fame instructions throughout sports history. So no, folks, there are no accolades that anyone calling themselves FBA publicly or even showing up to receive have ever received. Nothing. FBA has no accomplishments. They have no lineage. They have no icons. They have no heritage. FBA has none of these things unless they self-tether themselves to the backs of African Americans with distinction who actually have the accomplishments to show, which I have shown, folks. You're right. 35th question, not one answer. No, not one answer that you heard. I've entertained you as far as I did. I answered questions for you, but yet you have not answered a single one that I've asked. But still, keep showing everyone the mentality of the FBA. You're doing what I want you to do just by you being here. Continue on. All right, so folks, here we are now. This is the one piece that I want to say here. Baller alert. Now, this is one of the Black online articles or places you can find that discusses Black issues. But what entertained me the most a few months ago when I saw this, what FBA really means, Foundation of Black Americans Explained, you could tell by reading through this article that these folks themselves had never heard of FBA. FBA is just an online glee club. That's it. They're just out and around. There's nothing significant that they brought. So as a result, Baller Alert put together this article that made it seem as if FBA was some type of prominent entity, which it is not. But still, I made sure to drop a couple of things over here just to give you an idea of what happens when people do not check this type of nonsense. FBA stands for Foundation of Black Americans. It refers to Black people in the United States whose ancestors were held in chattel slavery in this country and emancipated after the Civil War. The term is based on lineage, not skin color, not cultural affiliation, and not self-identification. Okay, so already the article is starting out wrong, because ain't no way in hell that you're going to claim lineage but not utilize factors to describe your lineage. Not skin color, not cultural affiliation, and not self-identification. Here, let me show you this. So when I saw that, I thought, well, let me go ahead and just debunk this and be done with it. Claim lineage or claiming lineage without acknowledging skin color, culture, affiliation, and self-identification is an accurate portrayal, or basically what I'm saying is it accurate to claim lineage without cultural affiliation, skin color, and self-identification? Is it accurate? And what I got back, claiming lineage based solely on paperwork or DNA while ignoring self-identification, culture, and social reality is an incomplete and often inaccurate. Here we go. Let me start over again. I coughed and lost my place. Claiming lineage based solely on paperwork or DNA while ignoring self-identification, culture, and social reality is an incomplete and often inaccurate portrayal of human origin. Identity involves both biological roots and lived social truth. So as I said already, that Baller article started off in the wrong direction. But that's just not it. Let's keep it going. There's more to this. According to the official FBA website, the definition applies to up to 40 million Americans who trace their ancestry directly to freedmen, the enslaved Black people emancipated in the United States after the 13th Amendment. So again, the whole aspect of freedmen, as you all saw earlier, even that is incorrect, because the freedmen that FBA loves to associate themselves with are formerly enslaved Africans. And remember, if you talk to FBA, well, we have nothing to do with Africa. We're indigenous to America. But yet you always want to claim that which is not yours. Oh, here, let me drop this information about freedom. Where did I put that? Oh, I take it back. I think we discussed freedom earlier, didn't we? Let me go back and take a quick look here, folks. Foundational information. Where do we put that? Well, the good thing here is that I can always bring that back up if I need to. Oh, here we go. So remember, I talked about the freedmen earlier. Were formerly enslaved Blacks who call themselves freedmen descendants of enslaved Africans? Yes, formerly enslaved Black people who were called or call themselves freedmen or freedwomen were indeed descendants of enslaved Africans, though the term also specifically applies to those enslaved by Native American tribes who possess mixed or distinct cultural lineages. So the freedmen, which FBA loved to claim, they were Africans. But again, there's no thought process that ever goes into this thought from them when they arbitrarily claim, oh, you're FBA, you're FBA. So, excuse me. So when we look at FBA and we look at the terms of what you have here, a lot of people who don't know what it stands for, who it is, will actually take the time to tell you what they themselves think it is. But you can't even get FBA to agree on the terminology of who they are. Matter of fact, well, here, let me go back to a loose tooth here. Adria, honest question. Why do you seem so hostile to his ideas? He is presenting facts to back up his claim. There you go. And Loose Tooth just came here for the first time today, Adria. He has sat through it all. There's not a lie that I've told. But again, you're asking for, when are you going to edify me? A dumb person cannot be told that they're stupid. So therefore, how do you edify the idiotic? Nervous beverage sip noted, no. I've been up here for about 2.5 hours almost, and I'm thirsty. But again, just gallop and throw out your spurious conversation, anything that makes you believe that you're winning something that you aren't. Keep it up. So as I said before, folks, this article is it's an entertaining read. Now, whether it is fully factual, no, I really can't say. Even after reading it myself, as you saw just off the bat, you saw some contradictory information. But again, this is what happens when people are not aware of certain movements that exist, but yet they'll do a piece on it. There is nothing in this article that I would say that is accurate to the point that you can say that, yes, this describes FBA. Yes, FBA mimics a lot of stuff. They look like a lot of things here, but the truth of the fact is that no, it's just smoke and mirrors. Here's another example. When they talk about symbols, the movement has its own flag, known as the Maroon flag. It features 5 stars representing the 5 primary regions where escaped enslaved Africans form independent Maroon communities. Now, again, wait a minute, hold up. FBA says that nothing about that lineage involves Africans. It's only people who were born in America who could trace their lineage supposedly back to slavery. But again, it doesn't involve Africans. But yet here we go, the folks writing this article are stating here that the Maroon flag, right? Who knows what the Maroons are? The Maroons were Spanish-speaking African slaves brought to the U.S. by the Spanish, who escaped, and they also escaped in Haiti as well, but escaped from colonies that were not successful, or even from colonies like in Florida. I forget the name of it, but back then they had colonies that were successful. They were able to escape and go out into the marshes, into the woods, and develop their own communities. Maroon, meaning cimarron, or also, I guess they call them wild. But these folks were not, they were not FBA. They were African. But you're going to fly the flag of escaped Africans. Oh, my gosh. But oh, hey, look, Loose Tooth is going back and forth. Oh, by all means, hey, keep her busy, man, because this is entertaining. So as I said before, folks, you're going to have folks who don't know anything about FBA who just show up, get caught in the conversation, and if they don't know what they're listening to, it all sounds good to folks. Again, this is what you get with spurious conversation. But when you put the facts out there, the question is that, is anyone going to be learned enough to acknowledge and recognize the facts? Just a second. We need to get the other one. So let's put this back up here, because what's missing so we don't always get the numbers here. So what I will do here, so actually, let me put this over in the back. So the number that we're being given was 400,000, right? So I didn't comment right off the bat because I knew that she was in the area, right? But there's more, excuse me, that they say that has not been accounted for. Now, the thing is that we look at the amount of Africans who were brought over. You see that there's 388,000 to 450,000. All right, so again, I wasn't going to deny that. She was in the ballpark. Yes, I laughed because the fact that when you look at the number of Africans they bring over here, the question is, how is that even superfluous? What is the point of asking how many were brought here? The fact of the matter is that they were brought here. Asking the specific number of how many Africans were brought over doesn't prove anything other than my point is that we came from Africa. That's the main reason why I was laughing. Not laughing at the number at the number that you were looking for regarding how many slaves came over, but the fact that you were proving my point that Africans were brought over to America, because there are FBA folks who say that, well, there were never any slaves that came from Africa. No, there's no need to apologize for that, because you meant what you said, because you'll say it again later. I don't have a problem with that. Name calling doesn't affect me in the least. But again, folks, so what I typed in here, what was the total number of slaves brought and offboarded in America at the end of slavery? So over the course of the transatlantic slave trade, approximately 388,000 to 450,000 enslaved Africans were shipped directly and offboarded in mainland North America. By the time chattel slavery ended in the United States in 1865, by the 13th Amendment, the total enslaved population had grown to nearly 4 million people, largely through natural increase over generations rather than ongoing importation. But as I said before, the importation of Native Africans did still occur. You still had, as I said, saltwater Africans who were being brought to America from Africa, albeit you couldn't have a large load because it was still illegal, the international slave trade. But rest assured, every year there were Native Africans who were in America. Now, overview of the numbers. Brought by a transatlantic slave trade, roughly 388,000 to 470,000 individuals disembarked in the mainland North America from the 16th to the 19th centuries, and additional 60,000 to 70,000 may have arrived by the Caribbean. See, what folks don't realize is that for those slaves that were not brought directly from the transatlantic, they were brought over from the Caribbean, meaning that the number that we're talking about right now, they may have come directly over from Africa, but that doesn't account for those who were brought from the other slave plantations. As I said before, I was laughing not because of the fact that there was about 450,000 to 400,000 Africans that were brought here. No, I need to be honest right now. Yes, she was correct in saying that there was about 400,000. But the question I had is, how is that relevant? How is that even relevant? How many Africans came here? See, again, this is deflection. This is Giscalla. It serves no purpose questioning the fact, well, how many Africans came? The fact of the matter is, did we or did we not have enslaved people in America who were kidnapped from Africa? To which you have FBA folks who will actively deny, well, there were no slaves that came here. Oh my gosh. But then, hey, Loose Tooth, you're going to get drawn into some nonsense. Oh, he's already there. How does the minuscule number equal 48 million presently compared to the millions to the Caribbean and South America, yet the Black American population dwarfs the South American and Caribbean pop? So the question I have is, what is the relevance of that, Adrian? What is the relevance of what you're mentioning when the fact of the matter is that you have not answered the question, who is an FBA icon? Now, folks, if you've been watching this and even in the replay game, she has been gishing since she got here, ping-ponging from one topic to the other, trying to land a blow. If anything, she's helped confirm and broke the myth to any FBA who watches this that yes, there were slaves, there were Africans who were brought to America. The fact of the matter is that 450,000, 500,000, why does it even matter? How is that even a point of contention when no one ever asked? But again, when you're looking to score points, you're going to ask anything and everything. I mean, again, what part of the earth has the most pyramids? What has that got to do with FBA's stolen prominence? You see what I mean? There's no focus that can be maintained by most folks. None whatsoever. And look, it's relevant to the current population. No, it's not relevant to the population because no one is talking about population, Adriel. That's my whole point here. No one is talking about the things that you are making a topic to discuss because it shies away from what's being asked of you. Now, again, I've asked a few more questions, but I still have not had that one question answered. Adriel Hastings, provide the name of an FBA icon. Normally, I would have booted someone like this, but you know what? We need to have our mascot. Adriel Hastings, 4675. Will you be my mascot for a foundation, my foundational Black American mascot? I need comedy relief. Please make sure you show up again because I've got more folks who would love to watch the show you're putting on right now. A show inside the show, dinner and the show. Now, I want everyone to recognize here, she's been here for almost, 25, 30 minutes. She's asked damn near 20-something questions, but has not answered one that I provided for her. Here, let me show everyone that one question I asked. Oh, there's the cop out. See, backsliding. FBA is no more than a people who can trace their lineage to the 17th. No, there's no lineage for FBA to trace because any people who are Black in this country, as you want to call it, we take the Black moniker away, they are African descendants. The lineage you claim that they are tracing, again, I'm making perfect sense. Just because you don't want to acknowledge it doesn't mean I'm not making sense. My diction is clear. Anyone in this country who is African American, AKA African descendant, anyone who is those people that I'm talking about right now, me, Adriel, whether she wants to admit it or not, we have the same lineage that goes back to slavery. We have the same lineage to whereas if we trace it back to an ancestor who was on a slave plantation, that very ancestor could trace their lineage back to an enslaved African. That's a fact. That's sensible. I don't know how difficult it is for her to correspond here, but that is sensible and that is fact. And that's my point, Adriana. That is my point. No one called them FBA, called themselves FBA back there, but yet every time you look around, FBA is always saying that, oh, we have ancestors that we can trace back to. No, you don't, because no one called themselves FBA, which is the point I'm making. So there are no FBA icons, none. There are only African American icons that FBA always wants to claim as being FBA icons. Oh, well, thank you for helping me help you look silly. You've asked over 50 questions, but you still haven't answered my one. Folks, they make it too easy. All right, but enough. Let's do this. Let me go ahead and kill the music for a second, because now, all right, we're doing decent on time. Didn't plan to be here 2.5 hours, but you know what? We're still here. So first and foremost, let's kill music. Reason being, I'm going to go ahead and take this down, or actually, you know what? We can still leave this up. Let me do this. Let me turn off Adriel's Gish Galloping. Actually, let me take this back down. Remove. Where is the brand? Add to the space. This is what I hate sometimes when we bring some of this stuff up here. Bring it back out. So for whatever reason, try to turn the comments off. There is that. So it looks like, so we'll just have to keep the comments rolling here, because I don't know why all of a sudden, oh, there's my button. There we go. So we're going to turn the comments off here for a second, so I get some more real estate. All right, so this is a short that I dropped off, which was the lead-in for the show here. So I've got folks who have not bothered to come over on this side here on TikTok who are still rambling about what I have to say here. So fair use, fair use. You know what? You're absolutely right, because I said I was going to do the window with no sound, didn't I? Hold up. Let me take this out. So let me do this again. You're absolutely right. I put that screen up there and I said I didn't want any sound. So we'll do it again. And this time, boom, we'll go ahead and put sound in. All right, so yeah, I appreciate that, loose tooth. Oh shit. You know what? Hey, Beat Active. What's going on, man? Hey, I found you one. I told her if she hung out long enough, maybe some of my folks would find her interesting. Beat Active, meet Adriel Hastings. She's one of these foundational Black American supporters who engages in Gish Gallop. She's asked 50 some odd questions and answered not a one single question I've asked her. I've entertained her, given her a few answers to some of the things she's asked, but you know how it is with FBA. All fluff, no fact. But please go ahead and break her in here, man. All right, loose tooth. Let's try this again. Fair use.
Is something highlighting these accomplishments that you continually speak of in platitudes. Oh, we have done so much for this country. Look at all the great things that Black people have done. Yes, I'm looking at everything that African Americans have achieved that we've been recognized for. Notice I say African Americans, not foundational Black Americans, because that is a designation that was recently created and is attached to no accomplishments, meaning no credibility for the claims that you make. Tomorrow, Tuesday, August 18th, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube. I'm doing a show here. FBA steals prominence they can't achieve. I'm going to lay out everything that African Americans have accomplished, or just lay out a few things. There's so many things that we've done, but instead of me trying to spend an hour and a half trying to show this, I'm going to provide information that's easily digestible in small bites, because that's all FBA can deal with. That is, if you get them to use some type of common sense that is not common. So again, check us out tomorrow night, folks. A valued conversation, Gen X spoken word. All right. Holla at me. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe. This is what you're looking for.
All right. So basically, Beat Active, what I've done here is provided all the information that I said I would. I've shown that FBA has no lineage. I've shown that FBA has no icons. I've demonstrated that African descendant is an actual designation. I've provided all the information that we discussed in previous shows that, of course, as I've said before, no one is trying to convince FBA that they're wrong. All I like to do is have FBA around so they can demonstrate to everyone how maniacal and ignorant the logic is that they provide in the form of entertainment. And hey, she is not a disappointment at all. But honestly, let me go through some of this stuff here in the chat. So everyone, you just heard pretty much the statement that I put out here for the show tonight. All 2 hours and 45 minutes. So let me go. African Americans has done more than FBA facts. All right. Neil, you were African descendants. Who's this for? African Americans have done more than FBA facts. I think this comment went under the wrong person, but oh well, so be it. Okay, yeah. So this comment here was supposed to be down here, but on my phone, I got it a little bit messed up. Let me see. Can I copy this? Yes, I can. So copy that. And delete it from here. There we go. And I think this is where the shot was. There we go. Nope. So yeah, I think it's more or less just drifting under the same thing. So it doesn't really matter. But the fact of the matter here is that you're going to get a lot of these conversations that come out looking crazy. All right, so I'll put it this way. Since when have you become an American? Or since when have you became an American? I mean, there's nothing that you can do. There's nothing that you can do here when you're dealing with folks who have poor grammar, which shows poor comprehension, as well as a failure to delay self gratification, a failure to regulate behavior, which we're all seeing right now in Adriel's behavior. But again, let me try and read this. Since when have you became an an American? Since when have you became an African? The word is become. But here's the thing here. I was an American the day that I was born, just like the majority of other blacks in America. So you ask the question, when did I become an African? I was born an African American, aka African descendant, as I said before. Oh, here we go. Yes, there you go. Get on her, B. I've said the same thing. She won't give an answer. If she is a black person in America, if we take away African American, we take away Black American, we take away Afro American, Afro American, and we just simply say what we are, African descendant. If we just simply say we are African descendant, there is no need to go back and forth about being FBA or being anything else, or being indigenous to the land. Oh shit. I am a Negroid. I don't have one verifiable African in my family tree. See, this is that nonsense I'm talking about. Negroid was first identified where? Let's see if she figured this out, be active. I don't understand why. I am Negroid. Do you not realize where the term where Negro? wait, wait. Maybe she won't figure this out. Just a second, folks. Term. Let's see. Negro term. All right, yeah. So here we go, be active. I don't think she's going to answer this because again, FBA love to say, oh, look at how white people always want to call us. Man, they want to try and give us our classification. She sat here and said that she was Negroid, did she not? We both saw that. Now, I've said before, and Beat Actives heard me say this, how we have this issue of 18th and 19th scientific racism that was more or less used to solidify and more or less substantiate the slavery that we found African Americans, or excuse me, that we found enslaved Africans in as a result of the decree in 1455 by Pope Nicholas V. We're talking the Vatican, who in 1455 said that anyone who did not worship Jesus Christ, the fictional individual, was thereby considered an infidel and a savage and was deserving of slavery. Therefore, slavery was sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church, and Africa was one of the first countries that fell to this decree. Anyhow, so let me just skip over here real fast because we know we're not going to get a direct answer from Adriel. So she said, I am a Negroid. I don't have one verifiable African in my family. If you are black, you have an African descendant in your family. May not be native African, but that person's ancestry is from Africa. So technically, yes, you got Africans. We're all Africans. Why is it so hard to accept? but more or less. Negroid was a term identifying people of African origin. Negroid is an obsolete racial classification. Notice, this is again FBA playing the dozens. So she tried to get around, well, no, I'm not African descendant. I'm Negroid. But you know what? Negroid was still African, girl. Stop playing. Negroid is an obsolete racial classification term that was coined in the 19th century to describe people indigenous to sub-Saharan Africa and certain other regions. Today, the term is outdated, unscientific, and widely considered offensive. Well, if you're not African descent, it means that Black American, aka African descendants, aka African Americans, and the Afro diaspora is not your business. It also means you don't have any civil rights accomplishments, leaders, icons in any shape or form, because that was all accompanied by African Americans and Afro diaspora, aka African descendants, not that we know African descendants, FBA. That's just basic facts. See, this is why I tell you folks, you don't get into a discussion with anyone who has the FBA moniker, who believes that they call themselves FBA. As Mark Twain once said, avoid getting into fights with fools. Reason being, and I'm paraphrasing, they will pull you in, drag you down, and beat you with experience. Now, this girl just said that she was a Negroid, but now, well, African and Negroid are not synonymous. You know what? But Negroid, Negroid is what you attempt to call yourself because you tried to skirt around the fact that you are African descendant. Your shirt is black. You are not. Well, wait a minute. Don't you call yourself a Black American? Look, girl, you're just putting yourself in a rabbit hole. So now you're spiraling right about now. Black is my shirt. You are not. But wait. What about Black Americans? That's what a lot of FBA folks call themselves. Black Americans are now. Are you now saying they aren't black? Come on, girl. No, Negroid, us a land race. Why was Negroid outdated but Caucasian not? See, here we go. Like I said, Beatrice, we end up with the Gish gal just shooting from one point to the other. So this will be a long, ongoing thing if we let it go on. So I'm just going to go ahead and ignore her. She already proved my point here with this random nonsense, Spurs commentary, and backed herself into a corner. And now she's creating another corner to run to. Anyway, history and meaning, created by Western scientists in the 1800s to divide humans into three main groups, along with Caucasoid and Mongoloid. So you were just asking the question about why was Caucasian not done away with? Well, actually, because Caucasian used to be Caucasoid. So notice, we don't have Negroid, you don't have Caucasoid or Mongoloid. Again, this is all offensive and taken away. Based on old ideas about physical traits like dark skin and curly hair, used in older anthropology and colonial frameworks. Again, this is the scientific racism that I so frequently speak of. But again, we don't have to do anything else with that. Again, girl, you're just making this, you're just making this worse for yourself. But you know what? That's the beauty of the internet. It lives on. Adriel Hastings, you're going to be famous. Table 1-1, categories and definitions promulgated by the Office of Management and Budget and the U.S. Bureau of Census Definition Classification. Black, Black American, or African, African American. OMB definition of category, a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. Terms such as Haitian or Negro can be used in addition to Black or African American. Oh, here we go. Again, FBA means nothing more than foundational Black American, which means that it doesn't have any lineage. You see, you're not representing FBA well right now. All right, you are crumbling, you are on fire and burning, and you're not making a good showing. FBA means nothing more than foundational Black American. Oh, no, don't let Tariq tell you that, because to him, we are a lineage. We have experienced an ethnogenesis. But yet, when kicked in your ass, all of a sudden, FBA is nothing more than just FBA. Oh, B Act can go on for a while. 28th Central Federal Regulation, definitions, Black, not of Hispanic origin, a person having origins in any of the Black racial groups of Africa. Hey, BAC, you can go ahead and chill and ease back on that now. You've gone ahead and put the nail in the coffin, or dare I say, the spoon in her forehead. I'm just waiting for what else she's going to gish gallop and scurry off to and come back with next. I'm sure she's somewhere flipping through the internet trying to find a question to throw up here that has no relevance with anything we're talking about. But that is what an FBA distractor does. And folks, I am glad that she did show up so you can see this. A billion questions that she asked, and notice, has she answered my one question? Yo, let me turn this back on for a second. So just in case, folks, you may not have seen here, Be Active went off like he normally does with the facts. And of course, let me do away with this for a second. Let's just remove this for a minute. Can she prove that Black American doesn't mean an African descent? No, she can't. She can't prove anything. She couldn't. Matter of fact, I think she's going ahead and run off now. Oh, man, I'm telling you, that is the thing with, again, these FBA types. They won't answer any questions, but they will pepper you with questions. You aren't representing African American very well. You know damn well know what. Oh, girl, see, I told you. See, this is what happens when you don't listen. So be active. So let me throw this out here, man. Even if I say that I am not African American, if I were to say that I am not African American, does that wipe away the fact that African American was a term that was known back in the 19th, or actually back in the 18th and 19th century? By me claiming to say, oh, I'm not African American, does that wipe away the fact that African American was still a recognized but not used term? So let me do this, because she is just going to make a mess of herself. But all right, yeah, I'm good with it. I'm here for it. When was the term African American first recorded? And let me do another one here. What, to include Africa. There we go. All right. So from what I've got here, it's missing some of the terms here, but still, just want to make sure that's seen. Wait, what? You can't prove that Black American? No. What question? I haven't asked you anything other than one question. Name an FBA icon. Again, back in the Gitz Gallops. And he said plenty. He doesn't have to say anything else, but he will. You can guarantee if you're not seeing anything from him right now, he's getting ready to drop some more information on it. I doubt the people who love cherish those who are proud of their ancestors' roots, culture, ethnicity, traditions, or their African roots and ethnic origin. A thank you message for FBA slash Absoluto. Doesn't care what a small group of people like FBA wants to rebrand themselves or claiming delineation, because at the end of the day, under the USA Constitution, wait for it. Aren't you scouring the internet right now, John? Oh, no, I'm not scouring. I don't have to go out and look for something. All I'm doing is bringing something here for you to see. You asked earlier the term African American, where did it come from? I'm just providing that to you. When was the term African American first recorded? The term African American was first recorded in print in 1782, like I mentioned to you before, Adriel, on the title page of a published Philadelphia sermon titled A Sermon on the Capture of Lord Cornwallis, which is what I told you, which featured the byline by an African American. Early timeline of the term. 1782, first known appearance in print as an author's identifier. 1788, the variant Africo-American appeared. 1835, documented use in an abolitionist newspaper. And then you don't see much of it again until the late 1980s. Popularized and brought into mainstream everyday usage, largely through the advocacy of civil rights leader Jesse Jackson. As I have said before on numerous occasions, Jesse Jackson did not coin the term African American. Adriel, you can now take this knowledge with you back to your hive of incompetence and show them the same thing. FBA is simply non-immigrant Black Americans. No, it's not. Because if you are a Black American, and just a moment, remember now, you said Black wasn't the color, but now we're back to saying Black American, so Black is the color again? Your words, not mine. Hold up. Your shirt is black. You are not. I'm not Black, but just a second ago here, you talking about FBA are non-immigrant Black Americans. I thought if I'm not Black, or does that mean FBA is not Black either? Oh shit. Oh yeah. Mass's House Pets came out of Mass's House Closet, rebranded as FBA. Because now we can all easily identify who are the house pets around us. Matter of fact, all FBA members should tattoo FBA all over themselves, the initial FBA, to make it easier for all of us to recognize who are the Mass's house pets, those who we don't want to associate with in any shape or form. So yes, thank you, FBA, for doing us a great favor. By the way, hurry up. Did the icons you listed identify as African Americans? Jesse Jackson identified as African American. For the folks who were born before then, they identified as Afro American. So you see, folks, that this game we're playing, well, they didn't call themselves African American, but you know what? If I don't call them African American, this is why I said I can simply refer to them as being African descendant, because we are all descended from Africa. So this game of you wanting to play, well, I didn't hear him call himself African American. It doesn't matter because African American, Afro American, Afro American, it all identifies to being black, which is the same as identifying as Negro. Colored, although that is outdated and very wrong. But no matter how you put it, those are all factual things. But here, folks, check this out. So supposedly she asked a question, I give an answer, but it's word salad. FBA are not Black Americans because Black Americans are African descendants, not that we're not African descendants, FBA. Exactly. Yes, we are Black, but our skin is not. Ha ha. Oh my God. But anyway, so you know what, be active just because you showed up, man. I'm gonna keep it going a little bit longer. Yeah, well, let's put about another 15 and 20 on this. So let's go back. Because like I said, you're not gonna get any kind of sense out of her whatsoever. Let me turn the comments off so it doesn't cloud this. So as I said, when you look at all the stuff that was going on in the chat, here, you can see that I had a whole bunch of folks who showed up and wanted to say that I was mad. I've got nothing to be mad about because I provide facts. If anything, I'm annoyed when I look at the Black incompetence that I see that FBA is responsible for. Let me see if I can find. All right, so you had to jump in money earlier with this nonsense. That's not your African name. So again, you'll see this from FBA. I am African descendant, just as every Black person in this chat is over here. Well, it's over here. Every Black person in this chat is African descendant. But just because they want to call themselves something different doesn't mean that it's a fact. Hell, you can call yourself an airplane. Call yourself a boy, call yourself a girl, and not be one of those. Now we're talking another conversation altogether. But the fact again that you wanted to say that you are not African descendant is absolute nonsense. So, as I said before, I'll say it again. African American is what you heard Jesse Jackson claim himself to be, what I claim myself to be. But before the use of African American was brought back, no, these folks did not call themselves African American because they did not use the term, but the term existed. Instead of using African American, it was Afro American, colored, or again, niggers, what they called us. Negro, Afro American, colored, or nigger. That was it. Those were the four terms. But as you saw here, African American has been has been around for 200 something years. Just because it was never utilized does not mean that the option to be called that did not exist. Jesse Jackson revived the use of African American because it was more distinct and descriptive of who we are. Hell, you saw for yourself, 1782 is when the first recorded term of African American was used because these people were from Africa. How difficult is that to understand, FBA, especially you, Adriel? How difficult was that to understand? African was more so on the nose as a description then than it is now. The early colonists used African American sparingly because that's where their slaves came from. And I said before, we didn't bring slaves, or excuse me, they did not bring slaves in from Africa. No, they brought doctors, they brought teachers, they brought architects, they brought scientists. This is what was brought from Africa, or should I say, these are the people who were brought from Africa, who were then forced into servitude, forced into slavery. So again, there's this cat here called himself Money. That's not your African name. So he was trying to make an argument out of nothing. literally over my name. Oh, loose tooth. Hey, thank you for coming up, man. Make sure to drop back out if you can. All right. Catch you later. Me being ethnically Puerto Rican, that doesn't change the fact that I'm also an African descendant, and it also applies to the Afro diaspora and the Americas. Spot on. Talk that truth, be active. So what you have here is a whole bunch of FBA showing up with this nonsense. Look, warning, fake news. They are crying fake news because I was given all facts. Black Americans don't call ourselves African. Never. We have always called look at the poor English usage. We've always called ourselves Black Americans. No, you did not. But again, because you don't know any better, you'll say these things. Because again, it's like a glee club. Everything with FBA is like a pep rally of some sort. So I responded back to him. Black American descended from Afro-American, Negro, colored, African-American, Afro-American, and Native. Don't let your ignorance stymie anyone else's cultural progress. Sport. Oh, I have a spelling error. But then, of course, we have folks who show up and hey, let them know, oh, that's not true. And again, responding to the same thing I said, where he said, Black Americans don't call ourselves African. We've always called ourselves Black Americans. No, we have not. And look at this. You are not Black Americans, so you can't speak for us. Are you kidding? Look at the nose. Look at the forehead. Look. I'm not Black I'm not Black American. You know what? I am African American. I am African descendant. I am Black American. I am Negro. If I wanted to be that ignorant, but no, actually, no, I'm not Negro. That's incompetence. But still, nonetheless, African American, Afro American, Afro American, Africo American, African descendant, Black. I am all of that. So is everybody else. Yeah, man, you've just got to put your hand up to your head and you look at this. So Jawari said, laugh my ass off. You all are so pathetic that you never factor in Black Americans who have African names. Again, always that same got you moment. But I'm not the only person who recognizes this. People who call themselves Black American are the most well-colonized, well-conditioned, brainwashed, uneducated, delusional, ignorant, programmed, and mentally enslaved people in the African American community. Be active. Are you seeing this? I just ran down the list of what we call ourselves, and here she comes late to the party again. And when you give it to her, oh, we didn't call ourselves that. So, but again, Adrielle, we're not going to worry about you. You've already proven your worth to the conversation. You're comedy relief. So let me get myself some space. So here's what we have been called, or what we can call ourselves. It's African American. African descendant. Black. You admitted that African American disappeared. So what were we calling ourselves during that African American hype? Be active. Do you see how easily she makes herself the butt of the joke without any real effort? She is absolutely clueless. Questions have been asked, answered. But this shows you again, FBA has no knowledge. She literally doesn't know what we were called before we were called African American, which may have something to do with her age. But keep watching, sweetheart. Me stating that African American disappeared is not admission of anything. That's me stating a fact. It disappeared, but it didn't go anywhere for long. Or should I say, it disappeared out of mainstream, but it never left. It's always been there. It's just that most folks never referenced it because a lot of folks didn't realize that it was already a known term. But again, Negro, colored, nigga is what they like to call us. So where was I? We have African American, we have African descendant, we have black. Oh, we have did I put Afro? Oh, Afro American. Oh, see, it won't even let me use the word Negro here. So let me do this. 10-3 GRO. Whoops. Can't use that either. But I understand Negro is also something we identify with. So what's your point? We know that. I stated that numerous times. African American disappeared from the scene for almost 200 years, but was revived by Jesse Jackson in the late 80s in order to be used as something that was more identifiable and closer to our heritage. Again, what are these points you're trying to make out of questions nobody's asking that you want to make a centerpiece that has no relevance? You're just fishing, girl. Oh, so anywho, let me put this up here. Without our African ancestors, there would never be no FBA, and the FBA would exist in USA America without our African ancestors. That's just a basic fact. Again, yeah, FBA are what I would call culturally disconnected African Americans, or we'll just call them culturally disconnected African descendants. No matter what you say to them, they will defy all type of logic and fact because what was that Kevin Samuels like to say? Because of the need to be right. Word on it. But you know what? We're at 3.5 hours almost, so let's do this. I'll kick off another show sometime this week here. And what we'll do is we'll spend all that time just on TikTok. So what we'll do is we'll get into a live chat here because this chat is still going. I've got folks still responding right now. Look at this. I've got folks just losing their shit. Igbo culture. Shout out to this brother right here. The Hispanic Spanish colonizers named us a color in Spanish, Negro, meaning black. I mean, look at all this fact. Look at all these folks coming out to represent our African American culture, African descendants. I don't know what FBA thinks they're doing here by making the claim that African American is not a used term and that is outdated. We've got many folks who use this term. But what I'm going to make sure that people start making known and using more often is African descendant, because again, that is what we are. If we strip away African American, Afro American, Black, Negro, the fact of the matter is that the early settlers had it right. When they said that the enslaved Africans were African Americans, they were 100% correct because these individuals were from Africa. Jesse Jackson knew what he was doing when he revived. Notice I didn't say he coined the term. When he revived the term African American. I didn't agree with a lot of what he said in his later years, but he was spot on, at least with that aspect. All right, so with that being said, again, facts provided by Caucasians. What does air not mean anything just because it may have been a white person, may have seen molecules first? Is that what we're doing here? Now we're dealing with terminology. See, this is that type of nonsensical gatekeeping that you get from FBA. Adriel, you've played your part here. All right, so go ahead and sit down somewhere, silly ass. All right, folks. So we have gone ahead and run this as far as we're going to. So be active. I appreciate you showing up, man. I know you got in a little bit late. I don't know what's wrong with notifications. Adriel, thank you for making this most entertaining. Your clownery is kept. And again, I hope you accept my invitation to be the mascot. No, to be the FBA mascot. By all means, please come back, subscribe so you can be here. All right, so folks, that pretty much does it. So as I said before, FBA steals prominence they can't achieve. I've shown more than enough. We kind of bounced around a little bit, but the point was made. So there's no need for anyone to feel that you're walking away empty-handed, because I know that you get more than enough information to include actual comedy. Ah, shit. Pardon my language. And time. This time, bruh, I had it out there. It was advertised. You can't say that I just popped up and this is random. No. But I don't know what's going on with your notifications, man. So as I said before, you need to send me your email. So whenever I go live, I'll let you know directly. Yeah, bro, you missed it. We had this little FBA underling show up, and she showed her entire ass. So it's a 3-hour show, man, but I really do need to chop this up. But if you've got time to sit around, check it out. Otherwise, I'll see what I can do about getting some of this stuff tapped. All right, folks. So you know what happens from here. Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what we've got going on. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe. This is what you're looking for. MC Time, Beat Active. And of course, our main house pet, Adriel Hastings. By all means, please come back. All right, folks. Until next time, I'm out of here. Peace.